We're officially 1 year away from Avengers Doomsday, the movie that's going to wrap up almost 3 decades of storytelling. Dozens of films, hundreds of hours of TV shows, and more characters than anyone can keep track of anymore. And let's be real with each other. At this point, most of you have either given up trying to follow everything, or you've forgotten half of what happened. And honestly, I don't blame you. It's a lot. That's exactly why I decided to do something about it. I went back and watched everything. I broke it all down. I organized it piece by piece. And now I'm building something you won't find anywhere else. The complete Marvel timeline. We're talking the MCU, the Fox X-Men universe, the Netflix shows, all of it. Every storyline, every connection merged into one massive story told in the right order. Consider this your survival guide. By the time Doomsday hits theaters, you're gonna walk in there knowing more than anyone else in that room. Now, this is part 1 of our 3-part series on the evolution of the MCU, where we'll be covering the entire Marvel timeline. If you're enjoying the content, make sure to hit that like button and follow us so you never miss an update. Alright, you ready? Get comfortable. Put your phone down for a minute. You're here with Vericade, and together, we're going through the greatest story ever told on screen. Let's get into it. Before the universe existed, before time itself, there was nothing. Then came a spark, the Big Bang, an explosion that occurred 13.8 billion years ago. From that original chaos, 6 fundamental building blocks of the universe were forged: time, space, reality, soul, mind, and power. Each became embodied in a crystal that would later be known as an Infinity Stone. These 6 stones drifted through the empty expanse of space, silent signs of everything that would come to exist. In that same cosmic breath, the first ancient life forms emerged, the Celestials, massive cosmic beings. The first among them, Hiroshima, created the first star and spread light throughout the universe billions of years in the past. Their sole purpose was to keep life going. Each celestial grows within the core of a livable planet, and upon birth, spreads life by destroying the world that carried it, a cosmic sacrifice designed to enable the birth of thousands of other systems. Through this process, millions of solar systems were born, composed of planets including the 9 realms connected by the cosmic tree Yggdrasil. Among them, Midgard, Earth, and Asgard, the legendary realm of gods and light. As the Celestials continued their work across the cosmos, they faced a problem. The civilizations they needed to grow were being wiped out by dangerous predators before they could fully develop. These worlds required protection, populations that could grow large enough to feed the celestial seed growing in the planet's core. So the Celestials created a solution, the Deviants, creatures designed specifically to hunt down and eliminate these dangerous predators, clearing the way for intelligent life to thrive. But their creation backfired. The Deviants evolved far too quickly, adapting and changing with each generation. They became uncontrollable, violent, and soon posed the very same threat they were meant to eliminate. The Protectors had become the Predators. To control this chaos, the Celestials created a second wave of beings, the Eternals. Unlike the Deviants who evolved unpredictably, the Eternals were designed to be stable, unchanging, and loyal. These immortal protectors were tasked with hunting down the Deviants and safeguarding the developing civilizations across countless worlds. In Asgard's ancient history, spanning back millions of years, legend tells that the realm instantly destroyed the celestial seed that rested within it, breaking free from the cycle that bound so many other worlds. 2.5 million years before our era, a vibranium meteorite crashed in East Africa. Its radiation altered the local flora and gave birth to an essential plant, the heart-shaped herb. The land remained untouched for eons, its power dormant and waiting. It would be thousands of years before 5 tribes finally settled on this blessed territory: the river, the border, the merchant, the mining, and the Jabari. These tribes lived separately, each with their own ways and territories. Among them rose a warrior named Bashenga, who by ingesting the heart-shaped herb, gained superhuman abilities and became the very first Black Panther. With this power, he unified the scattered tribes into one nation, Wakanda. As humanity continued to develop and spread, certain ancient peoples discovered magic and worked to master it. Agamotto became the first sorcerer supreme and founded the Masters of the Mystic Arts. During his research, he discovered a crystal, the Time Stone, which he placed inside an artifact designed to control its power, the Eye of Agamotto. With the discovery of magic came the realization that Earth was open to mystical threats from other dimensions and dark forces beyond human understanding. To protect Earth from these dangers, Agamotto built 3 sanctums, one in New York, another in London, and the last in Hong Kong. But from light, darkness is always born. The 3 Mon Cathon was the first to awaken. He built a temple where he carved his most dark and evil spells. Among them, a prophecy, that of the Scarlet Witch, a being who will either rule or end the multiverse. From his work was born a forbidden book, the Darkhold, a book of dark magic capable of corrupting anyone who studies it. In a neighboring dimension, separated from our world by a mystical veil, another threat emerged. The Dweller in Darkness, a demonic entity that devoured the souls of the living. The devastated populations united under the protection of the Great Protector, an ancestral dragon who guided them to push the creature behind the Dark Gate. Around this sacred barrier rose Ta Lo, a refuge city and sanctuary of peace. In 5000 BC saw the arrival of a new Eternal squad on Earth, sent by Arishem himself. The team consisted of Ajak, Icarus, Circe, Athena, Gilgamesh, Kingo, Phastos, Makari, Druig, and Sprite, who traveled in a vessel called the Domo. Arishem gave them a specific objective: get Earth ready for Tiamat's awakening, the celestial who lay dormant in the planet's center. Throughout the following centuries, these Eternals moved across different regions, defending humans against deviant attacks while also influencing how societies developed. Their actions inspired countless myths, and they even turned the city of Babylon into a military stronghold. As civilization began to take shape, history started to be recorded. 2988 BCE marked a rare astronomical event. The 9 realms came into alignment across the cosmos. This alignment created an opportunity that Malekith, who ruled the Dark Elves, tried to exploit. His plan involved the Ether, which was actually the reality stone in its liquid state, and he wanted to use it to cover the universe in permanent darkness. Bor, who was Odin's father at the time, stopped Malekith's plan and concealed the Ether in a location between dimensions where nobody could access it. Quick shout out to one of my followers who caught something I missed in part 1. They pointed out that before the Big Bang, before there was anything, the universe existed in total darkness. The Dark Elves, led by Malekith, actually lived in this primordial void. They thrived in it. Then, the Big Bang happened, flooding the universe with light and creating everything we know. To the Dark Elves, this wasn't creation, it was destruction. That's why Malekith wanted to use the Ether to plunge the universe back into darkness during the Convergence in 2988 BC. Time moved on, and eventually Odin claimed the throne of Asgard. One of his first acts as king was commissioning Mjolnir, the legendary hammer, which was crafted at Nidavellir using power drawn from a collapsing star. This weapon went to Hela, his daughter who held dominion over death itself. The two of them launched campaigns across the 9 realms, building Asgard's empire through brutal military conquest. Eventually, Odin grew weary of endless warfare and wanted to pursue peace instead. Hela refused to stop fighting. This disagreement escalated into open combat between them. The Valkyries, who served as Asgard's most skilled fighting force, were nearly wiped out during this conflict. Odin couldn't bring himself to take his daughter's life, so instead he imprisoned her in Hel, Asgard's underworld, where she would stay locked away for as long as he remained alive. Around 1260 BC, Wakanda had grown into a secret power, hidden from the world but watching it carefully. The Hatut-Zaraze, the war dogs of Wakanda, were its secret operatives, sent on covert missions across the globe to protect Wakandan interests and retrieve stolen vibranium. Their first recorded mission involved Noni, a former member of the Dora Milaje, Wakanda's elite female warriors. She infiltrated the underwater complex of Nikati, a Wakandan dissident who had stolen advanced technology and vibranium to found her own nation, one that would use Wakanda's secrets for conquest. Noni succeeded in defeating Nikati and recovering the stolen resources. After completing her mission, she chose to leave the Dora Milaje and joined the Hatut-Zaraze permanently, becoming one of Wakanda's first spies in the outside world. In 1200 BC, during the legendary Trojan War, another Hatut-Zaraze named Bucky received his mission. A vibranium necklace had been stolen and traced to Troy, in the possession of Helen of Troy herself. Bucky infiltrated the Greek army under the false identity of Memnon, claiming to be an Ethiopian warrior. He fought alongside the legendary warrior Achilles for 9 years, earning his deep trust and brotherhood. When the Greeks constructed the famous Trojan horse, Bucky was among those who hid inside and infiltrated the city. Inside Troy's walls, he located the stolen vibranium necklace around Helen's neck. He recovered it, and since that was his only objective, allowed Helen and Paris to escape the doomed city. But Achilles witnessed this, and seeing his trusted brother help the enemy escape, believed Bucky had been a Trojan spy all along. Heartbroken and enraged by this perceived betrayal, Achilles attacked. Bucky tried to reason with him, tried to explain, but Achilles was too blinded by anger and pain to listen. In the fight that followed, Bucky was forced to deliver a fatal blow, cutting Achilles' heel, the strike that would inspire the famous myth. As Achilles lay dying, asking if everything between them had been a lie, Bucky could only say, "Not everything," with tears in his eyes. He placed coins on Achilles' eyes according to Greek tradition and returned to Wakanda. But the burden of ending his brother in arms was too great. Unable to face what he had done, unable to remain in Wakanda with that guilt, he demanded to immediately return to the field and left his homeland behind. Around the year 0, in a mystical city that existed outside normal space and time, 5 monks committed a grave act. Kunlun was one of the 7 capital cities of heaven, hidden realms that only appeared on Earth once every 15 years. Within Kunlun's walls, monks studied and mastered Qi, the life force energy that flows through all living things. But 5 of these monks, Alexandra Reed, Madame Gao, Bakuto, Murakami, and Sawande, learned forbidden ways to twist Qi and use it as a weapon. When they were caught, they were kicked out of Kunlun forever, sent away into the mortal world. Rather than accept their exile in shame, they banded together and used what they learned to found the Hand, a worldwide network that would spread across continents. They discovered a way to use Qi to extend their lives forever through a substance they called the Resurrection Elixir, though each revival cost them more of their humanity. To counter this growing darkness and protect the world from the Hand's influence, Kunlun formed an army of defenders. Every generation, a warrior was chosen to face the dragon Shao Lao the Undying. Those who beat the dragon and put their fists into its burning heart gained its power, the ability to channel pure Qi into their fist, turning it into an iron weapon of incredible force. This champion was called the Iron Fist, Kunlun's immortal weapon, tasked with hunting down the Hand wherever they appeared and protecting Earth from mystical threats. Around the year 400 AD, in India, 2 of the Eternals found something their creators never intended: love. Icarus and Circe, after centuries of fighting together, married according to the rites of the Gupta Empire, celebrating their union as husband and wife. For immortal beings created only to serve, this was an act of beautiful rebellion, choosing their own happiness over their mission. During this same period, centuries after Agamotto's time, a new leader was needed for the masters of the mystic arts. Remember, Agamotto had founded this order to protect Earth from mystical threats and had established the title of Sorcerer Supreme, the most powerful sorcerer and Earth's primary defender against dark magic and dimensional invaders. Now, a new Sorcerer Supreme was appointed to carry on this sacred duty, the one who would be called the Ancient One. She proved to be exceptionally powerful and wise, but also pragmatic. Knowing that Earth would need her protection for centuries to come, and seeing that her natural lifespan was far too short, she made a terrible choice. To extend her life beyond what was possible, this sorcerer drew upon forbidden magic from the dark dimension, the very realm of Dormammu, a being of pure evil that sought to consume all reality. She knew it was wrong, knew it contradicted everything she taught her students, but she justified it as necessary. After all, how could she protect Earth if she wasn't alive to do so? This hypocrisy would haunt her for centuries. During the Middle Ages, somewhere in China, a warrior named Xu Wenwu stumbled upon a discovery that would change history. He found the 10 Rings, 10 mysterious artifacts of unknown origin. No one knew who made them, where they came from, or what they truly were. They granted him exceptional longevity, allowing him to live for 1,000 years without aging. They also gave him terrifying power in combat, making him nearly invincible. Around these rings, Xu Wenwu built an empire. He founded a powerful network that would simply bear their name, the 10 Rings. For centuries, he would operate in the shadows, pulling strings in kingdoms, toppling empires, and shaping human history from behind the scenes. In 965 AD, winter came early to Norway, but this wasn't natural winter. The frost giants of Jotunheim, one of the Nine Realms, invaded the village of Tonsberg with an army of ice and cold. Their goal was to freeze the entire Earth using the Casket of Ancient Winters, an artifact of immense power that could plunge the world into an eternal ice age, making it suitable for their kind. Odin, who had sworn to protect Midgard, intervened with the full might of Asgard's army. The battle was fierce and terrible. Odin led his warriors against the giants and managed to repel the invasion, but the cost was high. He recovered the casket and brought it back to Asgard for safekeeping, but he lost his eye in the battle, a permanent reminder of the price of protection. On the battlefield, among the ice, Odin discovered something unexpected: an abandoned infant, small and weak, left to freeze in the cold. This was Loki, son of Laufey, king of the frost giants. Rather than leave the child to die or raise him as a hostage, Odin made a compassionate choice. He decided to adopt Loki and raise him as his own son, as a true prince of Asgard, hoping to one day unite Asgard and Jotunheim through this child. Loki grew up alongside Thor, Odin's biological son, never knowing the truth of his heritage. The two boys were raised as brothers, though they could not have been more different. While in Tonsberg, Odin also hid another artifact of cosmic importance, the Tesseract, a cube-shaped container housing the Space Stone, one of the 6 Infinity Stones. The Asgardians had used the Space Stone's power to develop the Bifrost, the Rainbow Bridge technology that allowed them to travel instantly between the 9 realms. Odin hid it on Earth, perhaps because he knew its power was too great to keep in one place, or perhaps because Earth would one day need its protection. In 1400 AD, Wakandan intelligence discovered that a statue containing vibranium had been stolen and taken to Kunlun, the mystical city that appeared on Earth only once every 15 years. A Wakandan agent named Basha received his orders: infiltrate Kunlun during its appearance, locate the statue, and return it to Wakanda. Basha successfully entered the hidden city and began his mission. During his time there, he was injured and was cared for by a kind woman named Jurani. He located the statue, but as he attempted to leave Kunlun with it, Jurani followed him. She revealed the truth. She was an Iron Fist, one of Kunlun's greatest warriors, capable of channeling chi. But rather than fight him, she offered to help. She used her power to extract the vibranium from the statue without damaging it, allowing both nations to keep what mattered to them. Basha and his superior chose to conceal this incident from Wakanda's council, knowing that revealing Kunlun's location and the existence of the Iron Fist could complicate relations between the two secret nations. They helped Jurani secretly return to Kunlun before the city disappeared again for another 15 years. In 1521, the Eternals gathered and realized something profound. The last of the Deviants had been eliminated. Their mission, the purpose they had been following for thousands of years, was complete. But as they watched the arrival of Spanish conquistadors and witnessed the fall of the Aztec Empire, as they saw the atrocities humans committed against each other, the enslavement, the massacre, the destruction of an entire civilization, they were forced to confront a terrible truth. Human cruelty, human violence, human capacity for evil was sometimes worse than anything the Deviants had done. And yet Arisham's orders were clear. They could eliminate Deviants, but they could not interfere in human conflicts, no matter how terrible. This realization convinced them to cease all future intervention in human affairs. They separated, each going their own way, living among human populations in secret, waiting for new orders from Arisham that they hoped would never come. They didn't know that Arisham's silence had a reason. He was waiting for Earth's population to reach the critical mass needed for Tiamat's emergence. In 1571, Spanish conquistadors reached the Yucatan Peninsula, bringing weapons, greed, and disease. They brought smallpox to the indigenous Finn tribe, a sickness for which the natives had no immunity. The tribe faced total extinction. In desperation, their shaman prepared a remedy using a local plant affected by trace amounts of vibranium in the region. The remedy worked. They survived, but there was a terrible price. The vibranium-infused plant altered their biology forever. They could no longer breathe air. Their bodies needed constant moisture, and their skin turned blue on the surface. They had survived, but the land was lost to them forever. They adapted, building a new civilization underwater. These were the first Talokanil, founders of Talokan, a hidden kingdom beneath the waves. Among them was a woman named Finn, who was pregnant when she took the remedy. She survived the transformation, but her unborn child was affected differently. She gave birth to a hybrid, an extraordinary mutant who combined the best of both worlds. He could live on the surface and in the depths. He had enhanced strength and speed. Most remarkably, he had wings at his ankles that let him swim at incredible speeds and fly through the air. When the Talokan saw these winged feet on the newborn, they believed he was a sign from the gods, like the feathered serpent deity of their ancestors. They called him Ku'uk-Ukan. As he grew, aging far slower than any other Talokan, his people's reverence for him deepened. They began to worship him as their god-king, the living embodiment of Ku'uk-Ukan, the feathered serpent. Years passed, and though the Talokan thrived in their underwater kingdom, Finn mourned the loss of her surface life and homeland every day. Unable to ever return to the land she loved, she lived with a grief that never healed. Eventually, she died of old age, her heart broken by the sadness of never seeing her home again. With her final breath, she made one last request: to be buried in the homeland she had been driven from. Ku'uk-Ukan, still appearing as a young man while his mother had aged naturally, led his people to the surface to honor her wish. But when they arrived at the land where their village once stood, they found it had become a plantation. Spanish colonizers had enslaved the remaining Mayan people, forcing them to work the land that had once been theirs. Enraged by the cruelty and oppression, Ku'uk-Ukan and the Talokan attacked. They burned the plantation and ended every colonizer there. As the chaos unfolded, a dying Spanish priest cursed Ku'uk-Ukan, calling him El Niño Sin Amor, the child without love. Ku'uk-Ukan took that curse as his name. He became Namor, because from that day forward, he had no love for the surface world. In 1693, in the town of Salem, Massachusetts, witch hunts had reached a fever pitch. But not all witches were the same. While Agamotto had founded the Masters of the Mystic Arts to study magic for protection, and while Chthon had created dark magic for destruction, there existed other practitioners, covens of witches who followed their own ancient traditions, passing down spells and rituals through bloodlines for generations. These witches lived in secret among normal humans, hiding their powers to avoid persecution. Among these secret practitioners was Agatha Harkness, a powerful witch born into a coven led by her own mother, Evanora Harkness. Agatha had been studying beyond the boundaries they set, delving into darker, more forbidden spells. She was brought before her own coven for judgment, accused of practicing magic that went against their sacred rules. They tied Agatha to a stake to execute her, to burn away her corruption. But Agatha had learned more than they realized. As her coven channeled their magic to end her life, Agatha did something unprecedented. She reversed their spell, turning their own power against them. She absorbed not just their magic, but their life force itself, draining them completely. Every member of her coven, including her own mother, crumbled to dust. Agatha walked away from Salem more powerful than before, now possessing the combined magic of dozens of witches, but utterly alone, marked forever by what she had done. Now, let's explore the multiverse. While these events were happening on Earth 616, the main MCU timeline, countless other versions of reality existed, each with their own stories unfolding. In 1845, on Earth 10,005, a sickly boy named James Howlett lay in bed in the Northwest Territories of Canada. One night, the family's groundskeeper, Thomas Logan, came home inebriated and upset, looking for James's mother. He confronted James's father, John Howlett, and in a moment of heated conflict, fatally wounded him. Young James watched his father fall and felt something awaken inside him for the first time. His mutation erupted in a wave of grief and overwhelming emotion. Bone claws emerged through the skin of his hands, breaking from between his knuckles. Without thinking, driven by pure instinct and pain, James used these claws to defend himself against Thomas Logan. But as Thomas lay there fading, he revealed a terrible truth. He was James's real father. John Howlett had raised another man's son. James's half-brother Victor Creed, Thomas's other son, witnessed everything. The two boys, both now revealed as mutants, both now marked as different, fled into the night together. They made a promise to each other. They would never leave each other's side. They would be brothers, loyal to the end. For the next century, James and Victor would fight side by side in conflict after conflict, their mutations keeping them alive through battles that would take normal men. This was the beginning of the man who would one day be known as Wolverine. In 1868, on Earth 616, something strange happened in a small house in Wisconsin. A young boy named Victor Timely was working on his inventions when a book suddenly appeared on his doorstep. He had no idea where it came from or who left it. The book was called the Time Variance Authority Official Handbook. Now, the Time Variance Authority, or TVA for short for those who don't know, is an organization that exists outside of normal time and space. Think of it as a cosmic police force that monitors every timeline in the multiverse, making sure time flows the way it's supposed to. Let me explain what that means. In the multiverse, every choice, every decision creates a branch, a new timeline splitting off from the main one. For example, if you choose to turn left instead of right, that creates a branch where you turned right. These branches, if left unchecked, multiply endlessly, creating countless different realities. The TVA's job is to prevent certain branches from forming. They do this through something called pruning. When the TVA prunes something, they're essentially erasing it from existence, removing that branch before it can grow and create problems. They use devices called reset charges that completely wipe out anything they target, as if it never existed at all. The TVA agents travel through time, finding these unauthorized branches, what they call nexus events, and eliminating them to maintain what they believe is the sacred timeline, the one true timeline that's supposed to exist. Anyone or anything that creates a branch they don't approve of gets pruned. But in 1868, this organization didn't exist yet, at least not in the way it would come to be known. The handbook that appeared on Victor's doorstep contained knowledge far beyond anything that existed in the 19th century. Diagrams of devices that wouldn't be invented for hundreds of years. Explanations of time travel, temporal mechanics, and technology that seemed like pure fantasy. Victor devoured every page. He didn't know that the book had been delivered by Ravonna Renslayer. Ravonna, for people who don't know, would eventually become a high-ranking judge at the TVA, one of the most powerful figures in the organization, responsible for deciding which timelines live and which ones get erased. But at that moment in 1868, she was just an agent working directly for someone far more powerful. He Who Remains. He Who Remains was a mysterious figure who lived at the end of time itself, in a place called the Citadel at the end of time. For context, He Who Remains had won what's called the Multiversal War, a massive conflict between countless versions of the same person across different realities, all fighting for control of everything. After winning this war, He Who Remains created the TVA to prevent his other variants from ever rising up again. He controlled the flow of time across all realities, deciding which timelines were allowed to exist and which ones had to be destroyed. Now here's where it gets really interesting. He Who Remains had orchestrated the delivery of this handbook to young Victor very carefully. You see, Victor Timely wasn't just any boy, he was a variant, another version across the multiverse of the same person who would become known as Kang the Conqueror. Kang, for those unfamiliar, would become one of the most dangerous beings in existence, a time-traveling conqueror who would threaten entire realities. He Who Remains himself was also a variant of Kang, just from a different timeline, the one who won the war and chose to protect the multiverse instead of conquering it. Are you still with me? I know this is a lot, but stay focused because this next part is mind-blowing. So what He Who Remains did was create a bootstrap paradox, a time loop with no clear beginning or end. By giving young Victor this handbook, He Who Remains ensured that Victor would study the book, build advanced technology based on its knowledge, and Victor's inventions and research would eventually become the foundation for the very organization, the TVA, that produced the handbook in the first place. The TVA would write the handbook based on technology that Victor would create, but Victor would only create that technology because he read the handbook. It's a closed loop where cause and effect circle back on themselves. Now, if all of this timeline talk and multiverse stuff is making your head spin, don't worry, you're not alone. We're going to come back to all of this and connect the dots as we go through the complete MCU timeline. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any episodes, because trust me, it all comes together in ways you won't expect. Victor had no idea he was part of this cosmic cycle, a plan designed by another version of himself to maintain control over time itself and keep the multiverse from falling into chaos. In 1896, in Wakanda, a very different kind of time travel was about to change everything. Prince Tafari, third son of the king and a trainee war dog, was sent on a mission to Ethiopia with his mentor Kuda. Their goal was simple: retrieve a vibranium axe that had been stolen and was now in the hands of outsiders. Tafari was young, ambitious, eager to prove himself and make his mark on Wakandan history. The mission took them into the middle of the First Italo-Ethiopian War, with Italian colonizers in conflict with Ethiopian forces. Despite the danger, Tafari managed to retrieve the axe. He was proud. He had succeeded where others might have failed. But as they prepared to return home, something impossible happened. A figure appeared before them, a Black Panther, but unlike any they had ever seen. This Panther wore advanced armor, wielded technology centuries beyond anything in 1896, and moved with the confidence of someone who had already lived through what was to come. She confronted them, trying to take the axe. Tafari and Kuda fought back, and together they managed to overpower her. When her mask came off, they were shocked. She was Wakandan, a woman, a queen, and she claimed to be from 500 years in the future. She told them a story that seemed like madness. In her time, in the 26th century, an alien race called the Horde, insectoid creatures that consumed entire worlds, had invaded Earth. They had taken down the Avengers, defeated the other nations, stopped Earth's heroes one by one. Only Wakanda remained, the last stronghold of humanity, because of their isolation. But isolation wasn't enough. The Horde came for Wakanda too, and without the technology and alliances that the rest of the world could have provided, Wakanda fell. The Golden City was destroyed. Her people were gone. She became the last Black Panther, the final survivor of a world that had ended. Using advanced vibranium-powered quantum technology, she had traveled back in time to this exact moment, to this exact mission. She showed them visions, the ruins of Wakanda, the Horde tearing through the city, the Dora Milaje fallen in defense of a kingdom that stood alone. She explained the truth. If Tafari and Kuta brought that axe back to Wakanda, it would remain hidden forever. But if they left it here, in Ethiopia, it would eventually end up in a British museum. And in that museum, over a century later, a man named Eric Killmonger would take it. Killmonger's actions would bring him to Wakanda. His challenge to T'Challa would force the king to confront Wakanda's isolationist policies. And in the end, T'Challa would make the choice to open Wakanda's borders, to share their technology with the world, to join the global community. That choice, the choice that came from Killmonger's actions, would save the world from the Horde. Without it, Earth would have no chance. Tafari faced an impossible decision. His mission was to bring the axe home. His duty was to Wakanda. But this woman from the future was telling him that completing his mission would doom his nation and the entire world. Before she could finish explaining, the Horde found her. Even across time, they had tracked her down. She was pulled back to her own era, forced to fight a battle she knew she couldn't win, to give Tafari and Kuta the time they needed to make the right choice. Tafari looked at Kuta, Kuta looked at the axe, and together, they made a decision that would echo through centuries. They returned to the battlefield and put the axe back where they had found it, hidden inside a clock. They left it for history to find. They didn't complete their mission, but they saved the world. Neither of them would ever know if it worked. They would return to Wakanda, report what happened, and live the rest of their lives wondering if they had made the right choice. But in 2016, in a British museum, Eric Killmonger would walk up to a glass case containing a Wakandan axe and begin the chain of events that would change everything. Tafari's choice had worked, the timeline had been set right, and the last Black Panther's dark future would never come to pass. The 20th century marked a turning point in history. This was the era when the first great heroes emerged, not from cosmic forces or ancient magic, but from the fires of human conflict. While wars between celestial beings and cosmic entities raged in the far reaches of space, our story turns back to Earth, where a different kind of war was about to shape the future of humanity forever. Over on Earth 10,005, between 1917 and 1918, James Logan and Victor Creed found themselves in the trenches of World War I. These two brothers had been fighting side by side since that night in 1845, surviving the Civil War and countless other conflicts. Their mutant healing meant death was never permanent, bullets and blades just temporary setbacks. But this war was different. The trenches were a new kind of horror. Mustard gas, artillery barrages, machine guns cutting down men by the hundreds. And somewhere in all that carnage, Victor started to change. James noticed it in his brother's eyes. The killing wasn't just survival anymore. Victor was enjoying it. Each battle fed something dark inside him, a savagery that grew stronger with every body that fell. By the time the war ended, James saw the truth. The brother who once protected him was becoming a predator. Their promise to always stick together was starting to crack. The final break was still years away, but World War I planted the seeds. 2 mutants survived the Great War, but only one of them held on to his humanity. Back on Earth 616, during the 1920s, a friendship was forming that would one day change the course of history. But to understand why, you need to know about a kid named Steve Rogers. Steve was small, not just short, genuinely frail. Asthma made it hard to breathe. He caught every sickness that came around. Doctors told his mother he might not survive to adulthood. On paper, this was the last person you'd expect to become one of the greatest heroes the world would ever know. But what Steve lacked in physical strength, he made up for in something else: heart. The kid had an unshakable sense of right and wrong, and he had absolutely no idea when to back down from a fight. It didn't matter if the bully was twice his size or if there were 3 of them. If Steve saw someone being pushed around, he stepped in. He got knocked down. He got back up every single time. James Buchanan Barnes, Bucky to his friends, was everything Steve wasn't: strong, confident, charming. He could talk his way out of trouble or fight his way out if talking didn't work. Bucky had every reason to run with the popular crowd and leave the skinny kid behind. But Bucky saw something in Steve that others missed. He saw courage that had nothing to do with muscle. So when he found Steve in yet another alley, bloody and defiant, Bucky didn't just pull him out, he stayed. He became the friend who always had Steve's back. Through the 20s and into the 30s, these two became inseparable, brothers in everything but blood. Neither of them knew that a war was coming that would test that bond in ways they couldn't imagine. Neither of them knew that one would become a symbol of hope for an entire nation, while the other would become a ghost story whispered by intelligence agencies for decades. They were just two kids from Brooklyn, looking out for each other in a world that was about to catch fire. By the late 1930s, the world was on fire. A dangerous regime had seized control of Germany and was spreading across Europe. World War II had begun, the deadliest conflict in human history. But within the ranks of this military, something even darker was taking shape. To understand it, you need to know about a man named Johann Schmidt. Schmidt wasn't like other officers. While the regime was focused on politics and territory, Schmidt was obsessed with something deeper. He believed the future belonged to whoever could harness ancient powers, mystical artifacts, weapons that could reshape reality itself. Most thought he was insane, but Schmidt knew the legends were real. He was given control of Hydra, the regime's deep science division. Officially, they developed advanced weapons. Unofficially, Schmidt used it to hunt for artifacts mentioned in forbidden texts. For years, he searched, sending teams across the globe, chasing legends that others dismissed as fantasy. Then, in 1942, his obsession finally paid off. His research had traced an ancient Norse legend to a small village in Norway called Tonsberg. Remember when Odin defeated the frost giants back in 965 AD? Well, around that same time, Odin made a decision. After years of conquest and bloodshed, after banishing his own daughter Hela for refusing to stop the violence, he wanted peace. And he didn't want dangerous artifacts like the Tesseract sitting in Asgard where enemies could target them or where they might be misused. So he hid the Tesseract on Earth, in Tonsberg, entrusting it to loyal worshippers who saw the Asgardians as gods. Earth was primitive back then, just Vikings, making it a low-risk hiding spot far from cosmic threats. The Space Stone, one of the 6 Infinity Stones forged from the Big Bang itself, had been sitting in an old church for nearly 1,000 years, protected by a guardian order that passed the duty down through generations. Schmidt had finally found it. Schmidt arrived in Tonsberg and found the church. He confronted the old guardian and offered to spare him if he revealed the Tesseract's location. The guardian claimed he didn't know where it was, but Schmidt wasn't fooled. He noticed a wooden wall with the tree of Yggdrasil carved into it, the cosmic tree connecting the 9 realms. At the center was a small button. Schmidt pressed it, and a hidden compartment opened, revealing the glowing cube inside. He took it, and on his way out, he made sure no one in the village would ever speak of what happened there. Long ago, a group of beings called the Clandestines were exiled from their home, a dimension called the Noor. These weren't humans, they were jinn, beings of light and energy, now trapped on Earth with no way back. For centuries, they searched for anything that could open a doorway home. In 1942, their search led them to British-occupied India, where they discovered an abandoned temple. The temple bore a familiar symbol, 10 interlocking rings. This was an outpost of the Ten Rings organization, the same empire built by Xu Wenwu during the Middle Ages when he discovered the 10 rings and used them to conquer for 1,000 years. Inside, they found something unexpected, a blue arm protruding from the rubble, the remains of a Kree. Now, the Kree are an ancient alien race that have been traveling the cosmos for millions of years. We'll get into their full history later in this series, but for now, just know they're one of the most powerful civilizations in the universe, and one of them had died here long ago with something important still attached to their arm, a bracelet. Not just any bracelet, a quantum band. These bands were ancient Kree artifacts of immense power. They could manipulate energy, open portals across space, and most importantly for the Clandestines, potentially open doorways between dimensions. But there was a catch. They needed both bands to fully open a portal home, and this was only one of the pair. One of the Clandestines, a woman named Aisha, put the band on her arm and immediately felt it, the Noor, the light-based energy from her home dimension. It was weaker here on Earth, but still potent. But there was a catch. Najma, the group's leader, explained they needed both bands to fully open a stable portal home. With only one, attempting to return could be catastrophic. Before they could search for the second band, they heard it. Explosions, soldiers. The British army was approaching. The temple began to collapse around them. The group was forced to scatter and flee. They never reunited. Aisha escaped with the bracelet and went into hiding. Over time, she changed. She met a man named Hassan, a local activist, and fell in love. They had a daughter named Sana. But in 1947, the partition of India tore the subcontinent apart. Amid the chaos and violence, Aisha's family was forced to flee for the newly formed Pakistan. During the mass exodus at a crowded train station, young Sana got separated from her parents, but that's a story for later. Aisha eventually passed the band down through her family, from Sana to her daughter Muniba, and finally to Muniba's daughter, a teenage girl in New Jersey named Kamala Khan. When Kamala puts on that bracelet decades later, it will unlock powers she never knew she had. But that story is still a long way off. Back in the United States, the American military had a problem. German forces seemed unstoppable, and Schmidt's Hydra division was producing weapons that defied explanation. Energy-based firearms, tanks that moved faster than anything the Allies had, technology decades ahead of what should exist. America needed their own secret weapon to turn the tide of the war. That's where Dr. Abraham Erskine came in. A German scientist who had fled the regime, Erskine had been working on something called the Super-Soldier Serum. Take a human being and enhance everything about them, from strength and speed to agility, healing, and reflexes, pushing them to the peak of human potential and beyond. But here's what the military didn't understand. The serum didn't just amplify physical traits, it amplified everything. Whatever was inside a person, good or bad, would be magnified. Give it to a brave man, and he becomes braver. But give it to a cruel man, and he becomes crueler. So while the generals kept sending Erskine strong, athletic candidates, he kept rejecting them because he wasn't looking for muscles. He was looking for character. And then he met Steve Rogers. Remember Steve, the frail kid from Brooklyn who never backed down from a fight? He had tried to enlist 5 times using different recruitment centers, sometimes lying about where he was from. Every single time, the same result. Rejected. Stamped 4F. Unfit for service because he was too small, too sick, too weak. But he kept trying anyway. But Erskine saw something different. He saw a man who kept trying when everyone else would have quit. A man who wanted to serve not because he craved combat, but because he couldn't stand by while others suffered. So Erskine asked him one question. Do you want to take out the enemy? Steve thought about it. The easy answer was yes. The patriotic answer was yes. But Steve Rogers never gave easy answers. I don't want to hurt anyone. I just don't like bullies. I don't care where they're from. That was exactly what Erskine needed to hear. Not aggression, not hatred, just a good man who couldn't accept injustice. In 1943, Project Rebirth began. Steve was placed inside a metal chamber. The serum was administered, Vita rays bombarded his cells, and the pain was intense, his entire body breaking down and rebuilding at the cellular level. When the chamber opened, a different man stepped out. Steve Rogers now stood 6 feet tall, packed with muscle, lungs clear, and heart strong. The peak of human physical perfection. Everything the serum had promised, and more. But then, tragedy struck. When a Hydra spy who had infiltrated the project took out Dr. Erskine right there in the lab. The scientist collapsed in Steve's arms, and with him went the secrets of the serum. Erskine had never written the full formula down, keeping crucial pieces in his head to protect it from falling into the wrong hands. Steve Rogers became the first super soldier, and he would also be the last. The military didn't know what to do with their one success, since they wanted an army, not a single man. So they turned him into a prop, a colorful costume, a shield, and a tour selling war bonds. Captain America became a mascot, a dancing monkey on stage while real soldiers fell overseas. Steve hated every second of it. He had finally become everything he wanted to be physically, and they still wouldn't let him help. That changed when he learned that Bucky's unit, the 107th Infantry Division, had been captured behind enemy lines. Remember Bucky, Steve's best friend from Brooklyn, the one who always had his back? He was now being held at a Hydra facility in Austria, and the military had written them off as acceptable losses, with no rescue planned. Steve Rogers had never accepted that kind of thinking. So with help from Peggy Carter, a British agent who had believed in Steve from the very beginning, back when no one else did, and who would become one of the most important people in his life, and Howard Stark, the genius industrialist, Steve went AWOL. They got him behind enemy lines using one of Stark's planes, and Steve parachuted in alone with nothing but his shield and his determination. He fought through the Hydra base, freed Bucky, freed over 400 other prisoners, and came face to face with Johann Schmidt himself. That's when Steve discovered the horrifying truth. Schmidt had used an imperfect version of Erskine's serum on himself years earlier, and it revealed what he truly was inside. His face had become a red skull, the outer reflection of the monster within. Steve and the freed prisoners fought their way out of the facility. When they marched back to the Allied base, the military officials who had planned to court-martial Steve could only watch in silence. The dancing monkey had become a war hero. While Steve Rogers was becoming Captain America, another transformation was happening. On Earth 10,005, in the year 1944, a young boy named Eric Lenscher was experiencing the darkest chapter of human history. The camps were humanity at its absolute worst. Millions of people were being systematically eliminated. Eric and his parents were among the countless families torn apart by this machinery of hate. When they arrived at the camps, Eric was separated from his mother and father at the entrance gate. He screamed and fought, reaching for them as guards dragged him away. And in that moment of desperate, primal need, something happened. The metal gate in front of him began to bend, the iron twisting toward Eric's outstretched hands, responding to his will. The guards didn't understand what they were seeing, but one man did. Dr. Sebastian Shaw was a scientist who had been studying prisoners with unusual abilities. He recognized immediately what Eric was, what he could become. Here was a mutant, a child whose genes gave him power over magnetism, over all metal. Shaw took Eric, and what followed were months of cruel tests and procedures. Shaw wanted to understand Eric's powers, to see how they worked, to push them further, and he believed that extreme emotions triggered mutation. He was patient, methodical, and monstrous. The breakthrough came when Shaw brought Eric's mother into the room and gave Eric a simple test: move a coin using only his mind. If Eric succeeded, his mother would live, but if he failed, Shaw would end her. Eric tried, focusing everything he had on that small piece of metal, but his powers were still raw and uncontrolled. He couldn't do it, and the coin didn't move. Shaw made good on his threat. In that moment, as Eric watched his mother collapse, something inside him broke and something else was born. His powers erupted. Every piece of metal in the room responded to his grief and rage. Equipment bent and shattered. The guards never stood a chance. Shaw was delighted. He had found the key. Loss and rage unlocked mutant potential. He had taken everything from a child to create a weapon. Eric survived the camps. The war ended. The regime fell. But the boy who had loved his parents, who had believed in hope and goodness, was gone forever after that room. What remained was something harder, colder, shaped entirely by anger. The child Eric Lenscher would eventually become Magneto, one of the most powerful and dangerous mutants who ever lived. And the rage that Shaw planted in him that day would bear fruit for decades to come. Back on Earth 616, the war was reaching its climax. Remember when Steve rescued Bucky and over 400 prisoners from that Hydra base? Well, some of those soldiers were so impressed by what Steve did that they volunteered to follow him into battle. They became the Howling Commandos, an elite unit that answered directly to Steve. And together, they had been pushing through enemy lines for months. They had become the tip of the Allied spear, taking on missions that no regular unit could handle. And through it all, Bucky was at Steve's side, just like he had always been. In early 1945, intelligence reported that Arnim Zola, Hydra's lead scientist and the man responsible for many of their advanced weapons, was being transported by train through the Austrian Alps. Capturing Zola could give the Allies crucial information about Hydra's operations, maybe even the location of the Red Skull himself. Steve and Bucky led the assault, managing to get onto the speeding train as it wound through the mountains. The fighting was intense, with Hydra soldiers around every corner and Zola's personal guards throwing everything they had at them. They succeeded and captured Zola, but the cost was unimaginable. During the battle, a blast tore a hole in the side of the train car, and Bucky was thrown toward the gap, barely catching hold of a damaged railing. The train was moving at full speed, the wind screaming through the opening, the ground hundreds of feet below. Steve reached for him and Bucky reached back, their hands just inches apart. Then, the railing gave way. Steve watched his best friend, his brother, fall from the train into the frozen ravine below. There was no parachute and no last-minute save, just Bucky getting smaller and smaller, disappearing into the white void. Steve's scream was swallowed by the wind. They never found a body because the ravine was too deep and the snow too heavy. James Buchanan Barnes was declared lost in action. The kid from Brooklyn who had always had Steve's back, who had pulled him out of alley fights and followed him into war, was gone. Except he wasn't. What Steve didn't know, what no one would know for decades, was that Bucky survived the fall. Remember when Bucky was captured at that Hydra facility before Steve rescued him? During that time, Zola had performed experiments on him, injecting him with a version of the Super-Soldier Serum. It wasn't as powerful as what Steve received, but it was enough. Enough to survive a fall that would have ended anyone else. His body was broken but not gone when Soviet operatives found him in the ice at the bottom of that ravine. They took him back to Russia and saw his potential, a super soldier, enhanced and nearly unbreakable. Over the following years, they rebuilt him. His damaged arm was replaced with a prosthetic made of metal, giving him strength that matched his enhanced body. But the real work was done on his mind. They wiped it clean using techniques that erased memory and identity, and they programmed him with skills, missions, and absolute obedience. Whenever he started to remember who he was, they would wipe him again. The Winter Soldier was born, a ghost, a weapon that intelligence agencies would whisper about for 70 years. He carried out missions across the globe, and then they would freeze him until he was needed again. And somewhere, buried deep beneath the programming, a fragment of Bucky Barnes still existed, waiting for a friend who thought he was gone. But we'll get back to his story later. Weeks after Bucky's fall, Steve led the final assault on the Red Skull. Hydra's main base had been located, and the Allied forces were closing in. But Schmidt had one last card to play. The Valkyrie was Hydra's ultimate aircraft, a massive plane, larger than anything that had ever flown, loaded with bombs powered by the Tesseract's energy. Each one was capable of destroying an entire city, and the Red Skull had programmed them to target every major population center in the Allied nations, including New York, Chicago, London, and Moscow. If the Valkyrie reached its targets, millions would be lost. Steve fought his way aboard the aircraft as it took off, battling through Hydra soldiers and pushing deeper into the plane until he reached the cockpit where Schmidt waited. Their confrontation was brief but decisive. During the fight, Schmidt grabbed the Tesseract with his bare hands, perhaps believing he could use its power directly, but it was a fatal mistake. The Space Stone activated in a way Schmidt never expected. A portal tore open in the air and Schmidt was pulled through, transported across the universe to a place he could never have imagined. The Red Skull vanished, his fate unknown, but the Valkyrie was still flying. The autopilot was locked, the bombs still armed, the targets still programmed. Steve tried everything to change the course, but there was no way to land the plane safely. The only option was to crash it somewhere the bombs couldn't hurt anyone. Steve contacted Peggy over the radio and told her what was happening. The plane was going down, and there was no other way. Peggy tried to find another solution, but they both knew there wasn't one. In their final moments together, they made a promise to have a dance when this was all over, a date at the Stork Club that Steve knew he would never be able to keep. The transmission cut out as Steve aimed the Valkyrie toward the Arctic ice. Everybody thought Steve was gone. The plane hit the ice, and that should have been the end. But the combination of the Super-Soldier Serum and the freezing temperatures did something unexpected. It put him into a state of suspended animation. Not alive, not gone, but somewhere in between. The war ended, and the regime was defeated. Hydra was believed to be destroyed along with them, and Steve Rogers became a legend, a symbol of sacrifice and heroism that would inspire generations. He would sleep for nearly 70 years, dreaming of a dance he never got to have. But we'll get back to his story later. The war didn't end with Steve's sacrifice. It ended with something far worse. In August 1945, the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs, one on Hiroshima, one on Nagasaki. The destruction was unlike anything the world had ever seen. Entire cities were wiped out in an instant, and the people who survived were left with wounds that would never fully heal. Remember the Eternals from the first chapter? The immortal beings sent to Earth by the celestial Arishem to protect humanity from the Deviants and help civilization grow? Each Eternal had a specific role to play. Thena was the warrior. Cersei could manipulate matter. Makkari had super speed. And Phastos? He was the inventor. For thousands of years, Phastos had been guiding human progress from the shadows. He didn't just build things himself, he planted ideas in the minds of humanity's greatest thinkers. The philosophers, the scientists, the engineers who pushed civilization forward, many of them got their inspiration from Phastos. Those brilliant physicists who unlocked the secrets of the atom? Phastos had nudged them in the right direction, believing that knowledge would make humanity's lives better. And now he was standing in the ruins of Hiroshima, looking at what that knowledge had created. Phastos was devastated. All those centuries of guiding human progress, of sharing ideas and pushing civilization forward, and this is what it led to. The power to destroy entire cities, to end hundreds of thousands of lives in a flash of light. He had believed in humanity's potential, believed that technology would improve their world. But standing in the ashes of what his influence had helped create, he couldn't see that anymore. He stepped back from humanity after that, unable to reconcile what he had given them with what they had done with it. The guilt would stay with him for decades. But we'll get back to his story later. Over on Earth 10,005, Logan was in Nagasaki when the bomb fell. Remember Logan, the mutant with the healing factor who had survived the trenches of World War I alongside his brother Victor. He was being held as a prisoner of war in a Japanese camp near Nagasaki. When the atomic bomb dropped, the blast should have ended everyone there. The heat alone was enough to reduce everything to ash. But Logan's healing factor kicked in. His body was completely burned, reduced to almost nothing, but he regenerated. And in those final moments before the blast hit, he did something unexpected. He saved the life of a Japanese soldier named Yoshida. Now, Yoshida wasn't just any soldier. He was one of Logan's captors, one of the guards who had been keeping him prisoner. But Logan saved him anyway, shielding him in a pit and covering him from the worst of the destruction. Yoshida survived because of Logan, and he never forgot it. He would spend the rest of his life feeling indebted to the man who saved him, building an empire in Japan while always remembering the mutant who gave him a second chance. That debt would come back around decades later, but that's a story for another time. Back on Earth 616, the year was 1946, and Peggy Carter was dealing with her own battles. Remember Peggy, the British agent who had believed in Steve when no one else did, who had helped him become Captain America, and who had promised him that dance they never got to have? With Steve gone, she could have walked away from all of it. Instead, she kept fighting. But the world wasn't making it easy. She had been relegated to secretarial duties at the Strategic Scientific Reserve, while her male colleagues got all the field assignments. That year, Howard Stark found himself in serious trouble. Someone had stolen his most dangerous inventions, and now he was being framed for selling them to enemies of the United States. The government was calling him a traitor. Howard knew he was innocent, but he also knew he couldn't clear his name on his own. So he secretly reached out to the one person he could trust. With the help of Howard's butler Edwin Jarvis, Peggy went undercover to investigate. The mission took her through a web of conspiracies, double agents, and a mysterious organization called Leviathan that was behind the thefts. In the end, she exposed the real culprit and proved Howard's innocence. During her investigation, Peggy came across something else, the last remaining sample of Steve's DNA, taken after Project Rebirth. It was the only way anyone could ever recreate the Super-Soldier Serum. People would have done anything to get their hands on it, would have started wars over it, so Peggy made a choice. She destroyed it, pouring it into the river rather than let it become another tool for destruction. It was her way of letting him go, of protecting his legacy. After everything she had been through, Peggy became one of the co-founders of S.H.I.E.L.D., alongside Howard Stark and Colonel Chester Phillips. The organization that would protect the world from extraordinary threats was built in part by a woman who had loved a man frozen in ice, a man she would never stop waiting for. But we'll get back to her story later. Also in 1946, Howard Stark led an expedition to the Arctic looking for Steve's body and hoping against all odds that his friend had somehow survived. The search went on for weeks, then months, but they never found Steve. They did find something else though, the Tesseract. The space stone that had started all of this was recovered from the ocean floor near the crash site. Howard brought it back to the United States, where it would become the foundation for decades of research. He didn't know that this single artifact would eventually lead to the creation of technology that would threaten the world, or that it would draw the attention of beings from across the cosmos. The Tesseract was placed in secure storage and studied by scientists who barely understood what they were looking at. The Space Stone had been returned to human hands, and the consequences of that recovery would ripple through history in ways no one could predict. In 1947, half a world away, another story was reaching its tragic end. Remember Aisha, the clandestine who had found the quantum band back in 1942 alongside Najma and the other clandestines? The one who had fallen in love with Hassan and had a daughter named Sana? She had been hiding for years, trying to build a normal life while keeping the band safe. See, after they found it, Aisha changed. She fell in love with Earth, with her family, and she no longer wanted to return to the Noor dimension. But Najma and the others were still desperate to get home, even if using the band meant destroying Earth in the process. So Aisha ran, and she stayed hidden for years. When the partition of India happened, everything fell apart. The British Empire had ruled India for centuries, but now they were leaving. And as they left, they divided the land in two: India for the Hindus, Pakistan for the Muslims. Millions of people suddenly found themselves on the wrong side of a new border. What followed was chaos. Families forced to abandon their homes, massive migrations in both directions, and widespread unrest as communities that had lived together for generations were torn apart. It was one of the largest and most painful displacements in human history. Hassan was Muslim, and over the years, he had faced increasing discrimination in his mostly Hindu village. He no longer felt he had the right to live a peaceful life in the land he called home. That, combined with Aisha's desperation to escape the clandestines, pushed the family to leave for the newly formed Pakistan. But they weren't just running from discrimination. Najma had finally found them. At a crowded train station in the chaos of the mass exodus, Aisha spotted Najma in the crowd and knew they weren't safe. She handed Sana over to Hassan and told him to get their daughter on the train no matter what. Then she turned back to face Najma alone. Najma confronted her and demanded the bangle. But Aisha refused, and Najma saw this as a betrayal. In her anger, she struck Aisha down and left her in the middle of the crowd. Meanwhile, Hassan was trying to find space on the train while holding Sana's hand, but in all the chaos, he lost track of her. Little Sana had wandered off, calling out for her mother. Aisha was fading, and she knew she wouldn't make it. But with her last bit of strength, she did something incredible. She used the bangle to reach across time itself, pulling her great-granddaughter Kamala Khan from decades in the future. And then something impossible happened. A figure appeared in the crowd, glowing with the same energy as the quantum band. It was Kamala, traveling back through time to this exact moment. She found Aisha lying in a cart, fading fast. At first, Aisha thought Kamala was Sana. The bangle had worked. It had brought her daughter back to her. But Kamala explained she wasn't Sana. Aisha understood immediately. She handed Kamala a photo of their family and gave her two instructions: get Sana on the train and protect the bangle. Kamala protested through tears. Aisha was supposed to save Sana. That's how the story always went. But Aisha just smiled and said, "She's okay because you're here." Kamala did exactly that. She found little Sana lost in the crowd, used her powers to lift her up so Hassan could see her, and reunited them just in time to board the train to Pakistan. The family line was saved. Aisha saw it happen. In her final moments, she saw her great-granddaughter save her daughter, closing a loop that stretched across generations. The band that Aisha had protected would one day find its way to Kamala, and Kamala would use it to save the family line that made her existence possible. It was a beautiful, heartbreaking moment, proof that the choices we make ripple forward through time in ways we can never fully understand. Aisha was gone, but her legacy would live on through Sana, through Muniba, and eventually through Kamala herself. Over on Earth 10,005, a different kind of conflict was brewing, one that would shape the future of mutant kind for generations. Now, if you haven't figured it out by now, Earth 10,005 is the world of the mutants. And we should probably talk about what that actually means. See, in this universe, some humans are born with something called the X gene, a genetic mutation that gives them extraordinary abilities. Some can control fire, some can read minds, some can walk through walls. These powers usually show up during adolescence, often triggered by stress or trauma. The people who carry this gene are called mutants, and for most of human history, they've been hiding in the shadows, afraid of what would happen if the world found out what they really were. Charles Xavier was born into wealth and privilege, but his life was far from ordinary. From a young age, he discovered he could hear the thoughts of everyone around him. He was a telepath, one of the most powerful the world had ever seen. Instead of hiding from his gift, Charles dedicated his life to studying mutation. He earned degrees from Oxford and became an expert in genetic science, all while dreaming of a future where mutants and humans could live together in peace. Remember Eric Lenscher, the boy who discovered his powers in the camps during the darkest chapter of human history? By 1962, he had spent nearly 2 decades hunting down the men responsible for what happened to him and his family. His search eventually led him to Sebastian Shaw, the scientist who had taken everything from him. Shaw wasn't just a scientist anymore. He had become something far more dangerous. See, Shaw was a mutant himself. He had the ability to absorb any energy directed at him and use it to make himself stronger. Bullets, explosions, even punches. The more you hit him, the more powerful he became. And over the years, Shaw had built an organization called the Hellfire Club, a secret group of powerful mutants who had infiltrated the highest levels of government and military on both sides of the Cold War. Shaw's plan was simple but terrifying. He had positioned himself to manipulate both the Americans and the Soviets, pushing them closer and closer to the edge. His goal was to trigger a nuclear war, let the humans wipe each other out, and in the ashes, mutants would rise as the dominant species on Earth. When the CIA discovered something strange was happening behind the scenes of the Cold War, they reached out to Charles for help. Now, if you don't know what that is, the Cuban Missile Crisis was the closest the world ever came to nuclear war. In 1962, the Soviet Union secretly placed nuclear missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles off the coast of Florida. When the Americans found out, they demanded the missiles be removed. For 13 days, the entire world held its breath as the two superpowers stared each other down, each one daring the other to blink first. One wrong move, and it would have been the end of everything. What nobody knew was that Sebastian Shaw was pulling the strings the whole time. A CIA agent named Moira McTaggart had discovered mutants working with Shaw and brought Charles in to help investigate. While tracking Shaw to his yacht, Charles found Eric for the first time. Eric had tracked Shaw there too and was about to confront him alone. Shaw's mutants overpowered Eric and left him to drown in the ocean. Charles sensed Eric's mind in the water and reached out to him telepathically, convincing him to let go before he drowned. It was the first time either of them had met another mutant like themselves. The two men couldn't have been more different. Charles was optimistic and believed in the good in people. Eric had seen the worst of humanity and trusted no one. But they shared one thing. They were both mutants in a world that feared them. Charles brought Eric back to the CIA's Secret Division X facility. There, using a prototype of a device called Cerebro that could locate mutants anywhere in the world, Charles and Eric began recruiting together. This was the moment Charles formed his first squad, young people who had been hiding their abilities, afraid of what would happen if anyone found out. Charles and Eric offered them something they had never had before, a place where they belonged. The mission came together at the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Shaw had orchestrated the entire standoff, and now American and Soviet warships were facing each other in the Caribbean, moments away from starting a global conflict. The team tracked Shaw's submarine to the blockade line, and Eric used his powers to pull the entire submarine out of the ocean and onto a nearby beach. That's where everything changed. They stopped the missiles, and Eric finally got his chance to settle the score. He went inside the wrecked submarine to find Shaw, but when he got there, he realized why Charles couldn't reach Shaw's mind. Shaw was wearing a helmet. See, what we didn't mention earlier is that the Russians had gifted Shaw a very special piece of technology, a helmet designed to block telepathy completely. As long as Shaw wore it, Charles couldn't touch him. Eric ripped the helmet off Shaw's head, and the moment he did, Charles froze Shaw in place so they could capture him. But Eric had other plans. He put the helmet on himself, blocking Charles out completely. And while Shaw couldn't move, Eric slowly pushed the same coin that Shaw had used against him as a child. The coin he couldn't move the day his mother was taken from him, straight through Shaw's head. Charles felt every moment of it through their psychic link. He begged Eric to stop, but with the helmet on, Eric couldn't hear him. Shaw was gone, and a part of Charles and Eric's friendship went with him. That helmet would become Magneto's signature. From that day forward, it was the one thing that kept Charles out of his head. But the battle wasn't over. When the American and Soviet fleets saw what the mutants were capable of, they made a decision. Both sides turned their weapons on the beach, not on each other, but on the mutants. Every missile, every gun, aimed right at them. Eric stopped them all. He held the barrage in the air with his powers, and then he did something Charles begged him not to do. He turned the missiles around and aimed them back at the ships. Moira tried to stop him. She took a shot at Eric, but he deflected it without even looking. One of them ricocheted and hit Charles in the spine. In an instant, Charles Xavier lost the use of his legs. He would never walk again. That moment changed everything. Eric looked at the humans who had just tried to end them, even after the mutants had saved the world, and saw the truth he had always known. Humanity would never accept them. They would always be feared, hated, pushed aside. Charles still believed coexistence was possible. Eric no longer did. The two friends parted ways that day. Eric took the mutants who shared his vision and formed the Brotherhood, an organization dedicated to mutant supremacy by any means necessary. Charles returned home and founded Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters, a sanctuary where young mutants could learn to control their powers and find their place in a world that wasn't ready for them. The mutant schism had begun. Two men who could have been brothers became the leaders of opposing ideologies, and the conflict between them would echo through decades of mutant history. But we'll get back to their story later. Meanwhile, in the 1960s, another universe was telling its own story, one that looked nothing like ours. On Earth 828, the world had taken a very different path. This wasn't a planet scarred by global conflict or frozen by Cold War paranoia. Without the horrors of two world wars, civilization had leaped ahead. The cities gleamed with retro-futuristic architecture. Technology was decades beyond anything Earth 616 had achieved, and humanity had already turned its eyes toward the stars. It was a world of optimism, of progress, of possibility, and it was about to meet its first heroes. Dr. Reed Richards was a genius, not the kind who locked himself away in a lab, but the kind who believed science could solve anything if you were brave enough to push the boundaries. A polymath with degrees in astrophysics, engineering, and mathematics, Reed had done something no one else on Earth 828 had managed. He built the world's first functioning spaceship. His wife, Dr. Sue Storm, an archaeologist and diplomat, served as mission specialist. Sue's younger brother, Johnny Storm, signed on as flight engineer, a hotshot with more confidence than caution. And Ben Grimm, Reed's oldest friend and a man as dependable as bedrock, took the pilot's seat. Their launch aboard the Excelsior was a moment of global celebration, humanity's first real step into the cosmos. It should have been a triumph. Instead, somewhere in the depths of space, a storm of celestial radiation caught them, bombarding their ship with energy unlike anything Earth's scientists had ever encountered. Reed had miscalculated the intensity, and the radiation tore through their bodies. They barely made it home alive. But when they crashed back to Earth, they were different. Reed could stretch his body into any shape imaginable. They called him Mr. Fantastic. Sue could turn invisible and project powerful force fields, the Invisible Woman. Johnny could ignite his entire body in flames and fly, the Human Torch. And Ben got the worst of it. His body was transformed into a massive, rock-skinned figure of incredible strength. He became the Thing. He couldn't turn it off. He couldn't go back to who he was. But he could protect the people he loved, and that's what he chose to do. The four of them became Earth 828's greatest and only heroes. They called themselves the Fantastic Four, and they founded the Future Foundation, an organization dedicated to global peace, scientific advancement, and the protection of their world. Reed's inventions pushed technology forward. Sue's diplomacy brought nations together, even brokering peace with underground civilizations. For 4 years, they were everything their planet needed. The world loved them. Then, in 1964, everything changed. Sue was pregnant with their first child, and the world was celebrating the Fantastic Four's 4th anniversary when the sky above New York lit up. A silver figure descended into Times Square, a woman on a surfboard-like craft, her skin metallic, her expression unreadable. She announced that Earth had been marked. A being called Galactus, the Devourer of Worlds, was coming, and when he arrived, he would consume the entire planet. Every city, every ocean, every life, gone. The Fantastic Four didn't panic. They investigated. Reed traced the Silver Surfer's energy signal and cross-referenced it with the disappearance of 5 other planets across the cosmos. Every world the Surfer had visited was gone. The math was undeniable. Galactus was real, he was coming, and Earth was next. So the team made a decision. They stood before the world and announced that they were going back to space. Not to run, but to find Galactus and try to reason with him before he reached their planet. They launched aboard the Excelsior, and what they found was beyond anything they had imagined. A cosmic entity that predated their universe, ancient beyond comprehension, driven by an eternal hunger that could never be satisfied. He had already consumed countless worlds. Earth was next. But then Galactus sensed something. Sue was pregnant, and the child she carried, a boy they would name Franklin Richards, possessed something extraordinary. The power cosmic. Even unborn, Franklin's potential was so vast that Galactus himself took notice. He offered the Fantastic Four a deal. Give him the child, and he would spare Earth. Franklin would inherit Galactus's cursed hunger, freeing the Devourer from his endless cycle of consumption. Reed and Sue refused. No deal, no negotiation. They would not trade their son for the world, and they would not let the world burn either. They would find another way. What followed was a desperate fight for survival. The team escaped Galactus's ship, but the Silver Surfer pursued them across space. To shake her, they slung the Excelsior around a black hole at unimaginable speed, and in the middle of all of it, Galactus forced Sue into labor. Between the stress of the chase, the gravitational forces, and a cosmic entity reaching across space to claim her child, Sue gave birth to Franklin Richards in zero gravity, aboard a ship hurtling through the cosmos with an alien hunter on their tail. When they finally returned to Earth, they had to face the hardest truth. They hadn't beaten Galactus. He was still coming. And the public, terrified and angry, turned on the family that had chosen their child over the planet's safety. But Reed didn't stop. Now, what we haven't mentioned yet is that long before any of this happened, Reed had been working on something in his lab, a teleportation system. It started small, really small. He was moving tiny objects across short distances, testing whether organic matter could survive the process. It was experimental, unfinished, and nowhere near ready for anything beyond a tabletop demonstration. But now, with Galactus bearing down on them and no way to fight a being that had existed since before their universe, Reed looked at his little teleportation experiment and asked himself the craziest question imaginable. What if he scaled it up? Not to move an object, not to move a person, to move the entire planet. He designed massive teleportation bridges, structures that could be built at key locations around the globe, synchronized to generate a warp field powerful enough to transport Earth itself to another solar system, somewhere Galactus couldn't reach them. Through the Future Foundation, Sue rallied the world's nations to cooperate, building the bridges and conserving the energy needed to power them. For a moment, it looked like it might actually work. Then, the Silver Surfer came back. She tore across the globe, taking out bridge after bridge, dismantling their only hope of escape. By the time she reached Times Square, it was the last one standing. And here's where Johnny Storm, of all people, became the hero no one expected. See, back when the Silver Surfer first arrived in Times Square, she had spoken to Johnny in her own language, a strange, alien phrase that no one could understand. Anyone else would have moved on, but something about that moment stuck with Johnny. He became obsessed with figuring out what she had said. He started digging through deep space transmissions that Reed had intercepted, recordings that contained the same language. Night after night, while Reed was building teleportation bridges and Sue was rallying the world, Johnny was sitting alone, listening to alien signals, piecing together a language that no human had ever spoken. And slowly, word by word, he cracked it. So when he intercepted the Surfer at that last bridge, he didn't fight her, he talked to her. In her own language, he learned her name, Shala Bal, and her story. She wasn't a conqueror. She was a woman from a peaceful world called Zen-La, who had given herself to Galactus to spare her own planet and her family from being consumed. She had been leading him to world after world ever since, carrying the weight of every civilization she helped erase. With only one bridge left, Reed had no choice but to go with a plan no one wanted. See, Galactus didn't travel alone. He relied on a massive world ship to cross the cosmos, locate planets, and consume them. Without that ship, he was stranded. So Reed's idea was simple but terrifying. Lure Galactus himself, not his ship, to Times Square, and use the last remaining bridge to teleport him to the far side of the universe, millions of light years from his vessel. Stranded, alone, with no way to reach Earth or any other world. But to lure a cosmic entity who only cared about one thing, they needed the one thing he wanted: Franklin. They would use their newborn son as bait. It was desperate, dangerous, and it required the family to put their child in the line of fire. But it was the only option left. Galactus landed in New York. He carved a path through the city, heading straight for Franklin. The Fantastic Four threw everything they had at him. Sue pushed herself beyond her limits, using her force fields to shove a cosmic god toward the open portal. Reed saved Franklin from Galactus's grip. Ben held the ground. Johnny was ready to give his own life to finish the job. But it was Shala Bal who ended it. Johnny had shown her the truth. He played back the final transmissions of the civilizations she had helped consume, the voices of the worlds she had led Galactus to. She heard their last moments, and something in her broke. When Johnny prepared to sacrifice himself to push Galactus through the portal, Shala Bal stopped him. She took his place. With everything she had left, she drove both herself and Galactus through the teleportation bridge and into the void. The portal closed behind them. Earth was saved. But Sue had collapsed. She had pushed her powers past the breaking point, and for a moment, she was gone. Then, baby Franklin, lying on his mother's chest, did something impossible. His power awakened, and he brought her back. The Fantastic Four survived. They had faced something that should have been the end of everything, and they had done it as a family. But their story on Earth 828 was far from over, and the wider multiverse had taken notice. But we'll get back to their story later. By the 1970s, on Earth 616, the Winter Soldier was at his most active. Hydra, the organization everyone believed had been destroyed after the war, had quietly survived, infiltrating governments, intelligence agencies, and even S.H.I.E.L.D. itself, and the Winter Soldier was their most valuable tool. Throughout the Cold War, he moved like a phantom, destabilizing regimes, reshaping the global balance of power, and vanishing before anyone could prove he existed. He was arguably the most dangerous operative on the planet, and no one even knew his name. It's also worth noting that 1970 is the year two familiar faces from the future briefly passed through Camp Lehigh, the same military base where Steve Rogers trained before becoming Captain America, now housing a secret S.H.I.E.L.D. facility. Tony Stark and Steve Rogers, traveling back in time as part of a desperate mission decades from now, came here to retrieve the Tesseract and something called PIM particles. We'll get into why when the time comes. But just know, 1970 wasn't only shaped by the ghosts of the past, the future left its fingerprints here too. And speaking of Camp Lehigh, in 1972, something happened in that same facility that no one would discover for decades. Arnim Zola, the Hydra scientist who had been quietly recruited by the United States after the war through Operation Paperclip, received a terminal diagnosis. His body was failing. But Zola had been planning for this. Using S.H.I.E.L.D.'s own resources, he transferred his entire consciousness into a massive computer system hidden deep within the base. Hundreds of databanks preserving every thought, every memory, every scheme. His body passed, but his mind lived on in the machine. And from inside that machine, Zola continued doing what he had been doing since the day the Allies thought they'd won. Growing Hydra like a virus inside S.H.I.E.L.D., recruiting, corrupting, and preparing for the day the parasite would finally consume its host. Now let's talk about the biggest chronological headache in the multiverse, on Earth 10,005. In 1973, a fracture forms in this timeline, splitting it in two, and at the center of it is someone we haven't properly introduced yet, Raven. She's a mutant who can shift her appearance into anyone she looks at, down to the voice, the walk, everything. The world would come to know her as Mystique. But before all that, she was just a girl who grew up alongside Charles Xavier, practically his sister. She was there when Charles and Eric built their first team. She believed in the dream. But when the two men split apart after Cuba, Raven was pulled between them, and eventually, she stopped following either one. By 1973, she was on her own. And when she discovered that a military scientist named Bolivar Trask had been capturing and experimenting on mutants to build a fleet of giant robotic hunters called Sentinels, she didn't wait for permission. She found Trask, and she took him out. But her actions backfired. Trask became a martyr, and the government greenlit his Sentinel program in full force. Mystique was eventually captured, tortured, and experimented on. And here's the cruel irony. The very thing that made Raven special, her ability to shift into anyone, to adapt her body to anything, is exactly what they extracted from her. They reverse-engineered her DNA and built it into the Sentinels, giving the machines the ability to adapt in real time to any mutant power they encountered. Fire, ice, telepathy, it didn't matter. The Sentinels could analyze and counter anything thrown at them, just like Raven could become anyone she touched. The one gift that had always kept her alive became the thing that would doom her entire species. What followed was decades of escalation, until by the 2020s, those machines had driven mutant kind to the edge of extinction. We'll come back to how this timeline gets rewritten. In 1979, at the 3 Mile Island facility, James, who we've come to know as the Wolverine, reaches the end of a road that started years earlier. See, after the wars, Logan and Victor didn't just drift, they were recruited. A military colonel named William Stryker had been watching them for years. Two mutants who couldn't be stopped, who healed from anything, who had survived every battlefield since the Civil War. Stryker wanted them, and he built something around them. a black ops unit made up entirely of mutants. He called it Team X. Logan and Victor were the muscle, but they weren't alone. There was a teleporter named John Wraith who could vanish and reappear anywhere in the blink of an eye. A technopath named Chris Bradley who could control electronics with his mind. Agent Zero, a marksman who never missed a shot. Fred Dukes, built like a tank with strength to match. And then there was Wade Wilson, a mercenary with a pair of katanas and a mouth that never stopped running. Wade could deflect bullets with his swords, move faster than any normal human, and talk his way through, or into, any situation. He was skilled, reckless, and constantly getting on everyone's nerves, especially Victor's. Stryker used this team for missions no one was supposed to know about. Raids, interrogations, extractions in places the military would never officially touch. But over time, Logan saw what they were really doing. The missions got darker, civilians got caught in the crossfire, Victor was enjoying it too much, and Stryker didn't care about collateral damage as long as he got what he wanted. So Logan walked away. He tried to disappear. He settled somewhere remote, lived a quiet life as a lumberjack, fell in love with a woman named Kayla Silverfox. For a while, it looked like he might actually get to be normal, but Stryker had other plans. He sent Victor, Logan's own half-brother, to take Kayla out. Logan, consumed by rage and grief, went straight back to the one man he swore he'd never work with again. And that's exactly what Stryker wanted. Logan agreed to the Weapon X procedure. Let's talk about what actually happened to him in that room. But first, you need to understand what adamantium is. Remember those missions Stryker had the team running? One of them took Team X to Lagos, Nigeria, where Stryker was after something specific. A rock that fell from the sky carrying an unknown metal element unlike anything on Earth. That's what adamantium comes from. Stryker had the raw material extracted and developed into a metal alloy in military labs, classified, incredibly rare. Once it's been heated and cooled, it becomes virtually indestructible. Nothing on Earth can break it, scratch it, or melt it down again. Keep this in mind when we eventually get to Earth 616. The origin of adamantium is a completely different story, but that's for later. The Weapon X procedure involved heating liquid adamantium to extreme temperatures and injecting it directly onto Logan's bones while he was fully conscious. Every single bone in his body, his skull, his spine, his ribs, even the claws that grew from his hands, was coated in this metal. The only reason Logan survived is his healing factor, regenerating the tissue damage faster than the adamantium could destroy it. Any normal person would have been gone in seconds. When it was over, Logan wasn't just enhanced, he was nearly indestructible. His claws, once made of bone, were now razor-sharp adamantium blades that could cut through almost anything. His entire skeleton now bonded with adamantium. Logan flatlined. The generals watching from above thought it was over. The experiment had failed. But deep in that tank, submerged in water, Logan's healing factor was doing what it always does. His heart started again. And while Stryker stood over him thinking he was out cold, Logan heard every word. Stryker giving the order to erase his memory, to turn him into another weapon. Logan erupted out of that tank, claws out, and fought his way through the entire facility before they could touch his mind. He made it to a nearby farm, where an elderly couple, Travis and Heather Hudson, found him stumbling into their barn with nothing but his dog tags. They didn't ask questions. They gave him clothes, a meal, a place to sleep. But Stryker sent Agent Zero after him. The next morning, Zero found the farm and took out the couple. Innocent people, gone. Just because they helped Logan. That was the moment something shifted. Logan took Zero down, and over the radio he told Stryker exactly what was coming. After he finished with Victor, he was coming for Stryker next. But Logan didn't go in blind. He tracked down two of his old Team X brothers, Wraith and Dukes. That's where he learned that Victor was still working for Stryker, hunting down mutants and delivering them to a facility they called the Island. Stryker had been experimenting on mutants this whole time, and Victor was his collector. They pointed Logan to a man named Gambit, the only mutant who had ever escaped the island and lived to talk about it. Logan found Gambit in New Orleans, but Victor found them first, and Wraith didn't make it out. Gambit eventually agreed to take Logan to the island. That's how Logan ended up back at 3 Mile Island, and that's when he found out the truth. Kayla was alive. She had never been gone. Stryker had staged the whole thing. Kayla was a mutant herself, with the power of persuasion through touch, and Stryker had forced her to keep Logan close, to watch him, to make sure he stayed in line. In exchange, Stryker promised to release her sister, who he was holding captive. The love of Logan's life had been a mission. Every moment they shared, every quiet night in that cabin, Stryker had orchestrated all of it just to keep his most valuable weapon on a leash. Logan was gutted. He walked away. But then he heard Kayla scream. Victor had turned on her after Stryker refused to give him the adamantium bonding he'd been promised. Logan came back, beat Victor down, and this time, he had the power to finish it. But Kayla stopped him. She reminded him that he wasn't an animal, no matter what Stryker had tried to turn him into. Logan spared his brother. Then Logan and Kayla did something Stryker never expected. They started freeing the captured mutants. Young mutants, kids, people Stryker had been experimenting on in the basement of that facility. And that's when Stryker panicked. He activated his last resort, Weapon 11. While Logan had been living his quiet life, Stryker had been busy with the rest of Team X. And Wade Wilson, the loudmouth with the swords, had drawn the worst hand of all. Stryker had taken Wade's body and turned it into something unrecognizable. He called it Weapon 11, and the idea behind it was simple and horrifying. Take one body and stuff it with the powers of as many mutants as possible. Wolverine's healing factor, Cyclops' optic blasts, Wraith's teleportation, which allowed Stryker to control him remotely like a puppet. They even sewed his mouth shut. They gave him an adamantium skeleton and retractable blades in his arms. Wade Wilson was gone. What was left was a Frankenstein, a patchwork weapon with no will of its own. Stryker called him the Deadpool, a dead mutant with other mutants' powers pooled into him. If you're thinking this sounds nothing like the Deadpool we'll come to know later, you're right. This isn't him. The timeline gets rewritten, and when it does, Wade Wilson gets a very different story. But that's for much later. Weapon 11 blocked the exit. Logan had no choice but to fight through him. The battle moved to the top of a cooling tower, and Logan was losing. Until Victor came back. Not out of loyalty, not out of love, because as Victor put it, they're brothers, and nobody gets to end his brother except him. Together, they took Weapon 11 down. But before Logan could get out, Stryker was waiting with an adamantium round. He shot Logan in the head. Logan survived, his healing factor saved him, but the damage to his brain erased his memories. Kayla used her last bit of strength to command Stryker to walk until his feet bleed, and then she was gone, for real this time. Everything Logan had been, everything he had known, everyone he had loved, gone. From that moment on, Wolverine wandered the world with no idea who he really was. That story picks back up at the turn of the century. In the year 2000, a young girl from Mississippi named Marie, who had come to be known as Rogue, discovers her mutation the worst way possible. She kisses her boyfriend, and he drops, almost gone, just from her touch. That's what Rogue's power is. When she touches someone skin to skin, she pulls everything out of them. Their energy, their memories, their abilities. And if the person she touches is a mutant, she takes their powers too. Hold on too long and she could put someone in a coma, or worse. She can't control it, she can't turn it off. Imagine being a teenager and realizing you can never touch another person again without hurting them. Terrified, she runs away from home and crosses paths with Logan somewhere in Canada. Neither of them knows it yet, but their meeting sets everything in motion. They're ambushed on the road by Sabretooth, and yes, this is Victor Creed, Logan's half-brother. But neither of them recognizes the other. Logan's memory was wiped clean by that adamantium bullet, and Victor, well, the films never explain what happened to him between 3 Mile Island and now. The calculating brother we saw fighting alongside Logan is gone. What's left is something more feral, barely verbal, working as muscle for Magneto's Brotherhood. It's one of those things the films just never connected properly, so we're calling it what it is and moving on. 2 of Xavier's most trusted X-Men arrived just in time. Scott Summers, known as Cyclops, a mutant who fires powerful optic blasts from his eyes, and Aurora Monroe, known as Storm, who can control the weather itself. They bring Logan and Rogue to Xavier's school for gifted youngsters. Meanwhile, Eric, now fully Magneto, is preparing a plan on a scale no one sees coming. His logic is simple and terrifying. If the people in power hate mutants, then make them mutants. turn the world's leaders into the very thing they fear, and they'll have no choice but to accept coexistence. He's built a machine that can emit a wave of radiation powerful enough to force mutate any human it touches. His target? The world leaders gathered for a summit on Ellis Island. His method? Use Rogue's absorption powers to fuel the device, since powering it himself nearly ended him during testing. What Magneto doesn't realize is that the process is unstable. Senator Kelly, his test subject, made it back to Xavier's school only for his body to reject the forced mutation entirely, dissolving before their eyes. Magneto's grand plan for equality would have been a sentence for every leader on that island. The X-Men race to Liberty Island, fight their way through the Brotherhood, and reach the top of the Statue of Liberty, where Magneto has already begun transferring his powers to Rogue. Wolverine reaches the machine just in time. Cyclops lands a shot on Magneto, giving Logan the opening to shatter the device and save Rogue by pressing his hand to her face, letting her absorb his healing factor before it's too late. Magneto is captured and locked away in a prison cell built entirely out of plastic. No metal, no way for him to use his powers to escape. The chess match between two old friends continues, but now it's through the walls of a cell. 3 years later, a mutant named Kurt Wagner, known as Nightcrawler, a man who can vanish and reappear anywhere in the blink of an eye, infiltrates the White House and nearly reaches the president before being stopped. The attack sent the country into a panic, but Nightcrawler wasn't acting on his own, he was being controlled. Stryker, the same William Stryker who turned Logan into a living weapon, had put him under mind control, used him as a puppet to stage the whole thing. A false flag designed to turn the government against mutants and give Stryker the authorization he needed to launch a military assault on Xavier's mansion. And it worked. And Stryker hit from two sides at once. While Xavier and Cyclops were away visiting Magneto in prison, Stryker had a trap waiting for them there. Xavier was captured before he even knew what was happening. At the same time, Stryker's soldiers stormed the mansion, raiding the school, capturing students, and stripping Cerebro for parts. Cerebro is Xavier's most powerful tool, a massive amplification system built deep beneath the mansion. Xavier is already one of the most powerful telepaths alive. He can read minds, project thoughts, even control people if he chooses to, but his range has limits. Cerebro changes that. It's a spherical chamber that takes Xavier's brainwaves and extends them across the entire globe. When he puts on that helmet and focuses, he can feel every conscious mind on the planet simultaneously, billions of people, all at once. He can find one specific person in a crowd of 8 billion. That's what Stryker came for. By the time anyone realized what had happened, Stryker had everything he needed, the most powerful telepath on Earth, and the machine to amplify his mind. Here's the thing about Stryker, the man who ran Team X, who built the Weapon X program, who spent his entire career using mutants as tools. His own son was one. Jason Stryker was born a mutant with the power to create illusions so real they could trap a person inside their own mind. Years before any of this, Stryker sent Jason to Xavier's school hoping for a cure. Xavier refused. He said there was nothing to cure, so Stryker pulled him out, but Jason's powers spiraled. After that, Jason turned bitter. He started using his powers against his own parents, planting visions in their heads, tormenting them day after day. His mother couldn't take it. The images broke her. She didn't survive. After that, Stryker locked his son away. And after 3 Mile Island fell apart, after Logan destroyed everything Stryker had built, he went back to his son. He unfroze him, hollowed out his mind, and turned him into a tool, just like he did with every other mutant he ever touched. By the time we see Jason again, he's a grown man in a wheelchair, empty, mute, completely under his father's control. The boy Stryker once sent to Xavier hoping for a cure had become his most powerful weapon. His plan was to use Cerebro against the very people it was built to protect. Imagine that same system, that same connection to every mind on Earth, weaponized. Instead of finding mutants, it attacks them. Every mutant brain on the planet lights up in agony at the same time. That's what Stryker was trying to do. Use Jason's illusion powers to brainwash Xavier and turn the most powerful telepath alive into a weapon against his own people. One moment, and every mutant on Earth would be gone. For the first time, the X-Men had no choice but to work alongside their greatest enemy. While all of this was happening, Magneto had found his way out. Mystique, still loyal to Eric, had gotten close to one of his prison guards and injected the man with liquid iron without him even knowing. The next time that guard walked into Magneto's plastic cell, Eric sensed it. Metal, flowing through the man's bloodstream. He pulled it out, shaped it, and tore his way through the prison that was supposed to be inescapable. Free, and with his own reasons for wanting Stryker gone, Magneto joined forces with Xavier's team. Together, they infiltrated Stryker's base inside the dam at Alkali Lake. They managed to free Xavier and stop the machine, but the battle damaged the dam, and the waters began to break through. As the team scrambled to escape in the X-Jet, the engines failed. The flood was seconds away from swallowing them all. That's when Jean Grey stepped off the jet. Jean was one of the X-Men's most powerful members, a telepath and telekinetic who could move objects with her mind. She held back the wall of water with everything she had, lifting the jet above the flood while the dam collapsed around her. She activated the engines from the outside, gave her team the chance to escape, and then let the water take her. Jean Grey was gone. But here's what no one knew at the time, not even Jean herself. When Charles Xavier first met Jean as a child, he sensed something inside her that terrified him. Her telekinetic and telepathic abilities were beyond anything he had ever encountered. Raw, uncontrollable, and growing. So Xavier made a choice that he would carry with him for the rest of his life. He placed psychic barriers in Jean's mind, mental walls designed to contain the full extent of her power. Jean grew up thinking she was strong, but manageable. She never knew that what she could access was only a fraction of what lived inside her. What she did at Alkali Lake, holding back an entire dam, lifting a jet, manipulating matter at a level she had never reached before, that wasn't just Jean pushing past her limits. That was the first crack in Xavier's barriers. And deep beneath the surface of Alkali Lake, something was already stirring. 3 years after Alkali Lake, a pharmaceutical company called Worthington Labs makes an announcement that changes everything. They've developed a way to suppress the X gene, a permanent treatment that strips a mutant of their powers entirely. They're calling it the Cure. And this doesn't come out of nowhere. Years earlier, a boy named Warren Worthington III woke up one day to find something growing out of his back. White, feathered wings pushing through his skin. He didn't tell anyone. He locked himself in the bathroom and tried to remove them himself, scraping and pulling, feathers scattered across the floor. His father heard him in there and broke the door open. He saw the wings, and the look on his face said everything. The boy looked up at his father, and all he could say was, "Dad, I'm sorry." That image never left the father. Warren Worthington II poured everything, his money, his company, his obsession, into developing a way to suppress the mutant gene entirely. 10 years later, when the cure was ready, Worthington Labs announced it to the world. The source of the cure turned out to be a young boy named Jimmy, also known as Leech, whose mutation naturally cancels out the abilities of any mutant near him. His DNA became the foundation for everything, and Worthington Labs kept him housed in a facility on Alcatraz Island. And Warren's father chose his own son to be the first test subject, right there in the company's labs. Warren went along with it, not because he wanted to, but because part of him still wanted to make his father proud. They stood him up in a harness, strapped his arms down with leather restraints, orderlies on either side holding him in place. The needles were ready. But the moment it became real, something broke. Warren looked at his father and said, "No, it's what you want." Then he tore through the restraints, knocked the orderlies aside, spread his wings wide, and flew straight through the window. He never went back. He chose what he was over what his father wanted him to be. The announcement hits the mutant world like a shockwave, and it doesn't land the same way for everyone. Think about Rogue, the girl who found out what she was because she kissed her boyfriend and almost put him in the ground. She hasn't felt another person's skin since that day. Every handshake, every hug, every moment of contact that normal people take for granted, all of it taken from her. Now, someone's standing on national television telling her there's a way to get all of that back. She doesn't see politics. She sees a life she's been locked out of since she was a teenager. But walk into Xavier's school and say the word cure and watch what happens. The word cure implies sickness, implies something is wrong with you. Storm says it plainly. Since when did they become a disease? These are people who grew up being told by Xavier that their powers are gifts, that being a mutant is the next step in human evolution, that they should be proud of what they are. And now the world is offering to erase it. To them, the cure isn't hope, it's an insult dressed up as compassion. And then there's Eric. Magneto doesn't see an insult, he sees a weapon. He's seen this before, not the science, but the logic behind it. A government identifies a group of people as different, then offers a solution to make them normal. Eric Lensher knows exactly where that road leads. He lived it. And here's the thing, he's not wrong. The military does eventually weaponize the cure, loading it into darts and firing them at mutants on the battlefield. Everything Eric warned about comes true. So he starts building an army, rallying every mutant willing to fight for their right to exist as they are. And in the process of freeing imprisoned mutants to join his cause, something happens that shows exactly who Eric Lensher is when it counts. Mystique, the woman who has been by his side for decades, who broke him out of prison, who has been his most loyal soldier, throws herself in front of a cure dart meant for him. It hits her. Her powers vanish. Her blue skin fades to something ordinary. She's lying there, looking up at the man she gave everything for. And Magneto looks at her, really looks at her, and walks away. He doesn't kneel. He doesn't say goodbye. She's no longer one of them, and that's all it takes. Decades of loyalty gone in 1 second. And that tells you more about Magneto than any speech he's ever given. But the cure isn't the only thing shaking this world apart. Cyclops hasn't been the same since Alkali Lake. The man who led the X-Men, who always had a plan, who held the team together when no one else could, has been falling apart ever since Jean went under that water. He can't let it go, so he goes back. He rides his motorcycle to Alkali Lake, walks to the edge of the water, and stands where she disappeared. Her voice is in his head, louder and louder, and the grief just takes over. He rips off his glasses and lets his optic blast tear into the lake. All that pain, all that loss, just pouring out of him. And that's when the water starts to move. Something stirs beneath the surface, and Jean Grey rises from the lake. She's standing right in front of him. Scott can barely process what he's seeing. They embrace. She tells him to take off his glasses, to let her see his eyes. He says no, he can't, he'll hurt her. But she tells him she can control it now. She takes the glasses off herself. For the first time, he's looking at her with his own eyes, and nothing bad is happening. They kiss, and then her expression changes. Something behind her eyes shifts, and just like that, Cyclops is gone. The leader of the X-Men, taken in a moment he thought was a miracle. Back at the mansion, Xavier feels it. Something terrible just happened to Scott, and he sends Wolverine and Storm to Alkali Lake immediately. When they arrive, all that's left are floating rocks, Scott's glasses drifting on the water, and Jean lying unconscious. They bring her back to the mansion and put her in the infirmary. That's when Xavier tells them the truth about what he did. Remember those psychic barriers Xavier placed in Jean's mind when she was a child? The walls he built to contain the full extent of her power? What Jean did at Alkali Lake, holding back that dam, that was the first crack. And now those walls have shattered completely. What came out the other side is something Xavier calls the Phoenix, a second personality born from the part of Jean's power that was never meant to see the light. Logan doesn't take it well. The idea that Xavier has been inside Jean's head her entire life, controlling what she can and can't access, disgusts him. But that argument gets cut short. Logan goes to check on Jean alone, and when she wakes up, she doesn't remember what happened to Scott. She starts acting differently, saying things Jean would never say, trying to pull Logan in. He realizes this isn't Jean anymore, this is the Phoenix. And before anyone can stop it, the Phoenix lashes out, knocks Logan unconscious, and escapes the mansion. Xavier tries to reach her telepathically, but she's blocking him. He can feel how strong she's become, and he knows where she's going. She's heading back to the place where it all started, her parents' house, the same house Xavier and Eric visited when she was a little girl. On the other side of things, Callisto, one of Magneto's lieutenants who can sense mutant power levels, picks up a Class 5 mutant signature, and Magneto knows immediately who it is. Both sides race to Jean's childhood home, and they arrive at practically the same time. Xavier tells Logan and Storm to wait outside while he goes in alone, and then Magneto walks up behind them, telling Charles he was right about this one all along. Xavier walks in and tries to bring Jean back, talking to her the way he always has, trying to reach the woman behind the power. Magneto is right there too, but he's not trying to save Jean. He's trying to recruit the Phoenix. He wants that power on his side, and Xavier pushes harder, trying to break through to the real Jean. For a moment, it almost works.
But the Phoenix doesn't want to be contained again. The house begins to shake, objects start floating, and then the Phoenix turns on Xavier, the most powerful mind on the planet, the man who built everything the X-Men stand on, the teacher who shaped an entire generation of mutants, is erased from existence right there in that living room. Jean leaves with Magneto, and the X-Men are left with an empty wheelchair and no one to fill it.
With Xavier gone and the Phoenix at his side, Magneto makes his move on Alcatraz, and the way he does it tells you everything about the scale of power we're dealing with. He walks up to the Golden Gate Bridge, rips the entire thing off its foundation, and drops it onto Alcatraz Island to give his army a direct path straight to the cure facility. The goal is simple: wipe out the source of the cure so it can never be used against mutant kind. The military is already there, equipped with cure darts made from plastic, no metal, nothing Magneto can manipulate. The Brotherhood charges across the bridge, and the X-Men arrive to meet them. And for a while, it's a full-scale war on that island. But during the chaos, Beast manages to get close enough to hit Magneto with the cure, and just like that, Eric's powers vanish. The man who just moved an entire bridge with his mind is suddenly just a man standing on a battlefield with nothing. But the real threat was never Magneto. The Phoenix emerges, and Jean begins tearing apart everything around her. The island, the buildings, the soldiers, the mutants, everything starts breaking down at the molecular level. No one can get near her. No one except Logan. His healing factor is the only thing keeping him alive as he walks toward her through the wave of destruction, his skin tearing apart and rebuilding with every single step he takes. He pushes through it, step by step, because he's the only one who can. He reaches Jean, and for one moment, she's there. Not the Phoenix, but the real Jean. She looks at him, and she knows what she's asking. She begs him to stop her, to free her from what she's become. Logan tells her he loves her, and then he does what no one else could. When the dust settles, the X-Men have lost everything. Jean Grey, Xavier, Cyclops, all of them gone. Magneto is powerless, and the team is broken. Storm takes over the school, and Logan stays on as a teacher. And Rogue, the girl who could never touch anyone, makes a choice that says everything about what this world does to people. She takes the cure, not because she was forced, and not because she was weaponized, but because she wanted to hold her boyfriend's hand. She wanted to kiss someone without putting them in a coma. For the first time, she and Bobby touch skin to skin. That moment is quiet, but it hits hard. She gave up a part of who she was just to feel normal. But the story doesn't end there. Two things happen after the dust settles that change everything. In a park somewhere, a depowered Eric Lensher sits alone at a chessboard. He reaches toward a metal piece, and it trembles. Just barely, just for a second, but it moves. The cure that was supposed to be permanent may not be permanent at all. If Magneto's powers are coming back, that means every mutant who was hit with a cure dart on that island could get their abilities back too. The cure was never a solution. It was a delay. And then there's Xavier. Earlier that year, before any of this happened, Xavier had taught a class to his students about the ethics of transferring a person's consciousness from one body into another. He showed them a video from Dr. Moira McTaggart about a comatose patient with no mind of his own, a body that was alive but had never had a conscious thought. He asked his students what they would do if they could move someone's mind into that body. It seemed like a philosophy lesson at the time, but after the Phoenix erased him, something happened. That same comatose patient, the one from the video, suddenly spoke for the first time in his life, and the voice that came out was Charles Xavier's. His body was gone, but his mind, the most powerful mind on the planet, had found a new home. The man who built the X-Men, who trained an entire generation of mutants to believe in coexistence, who gave his life trying to save Jean Grey, was still out there somewhere, and he would be needed again sooner than anyone thinks. 7 years after Alcatraz, Logan has disappeared. No X-Men, no mansion, no mission, nothing. He's living alone in the Canadian wilderness, a man who doesn't want to be found. And every night, Jean Grey is there, in his head. The woman he loved, the woman he had to put down to save everyone else. That kind of weight doesn't get lighter with time, it just settles deeper. But someone finds him. A young mutant named Yukio tracks Logan down with a message from a man he hasn't seen in decades. Yukio has a gift of her own. She can see how people are going to pass before it happens. She tells Logan that a man named Ichiro Yoshida is requesting his presence in Japan, and that Yoshida is running out of time. Remember the young Japanese soldier Logan shielded in that pit at Nagasaki? That soldier survived because of Logan, and he never forgot that debt. In the decades that followed, Yoshida built an empire. He became the head of one of the most powerful technology corporations in Japan, a man with more influence and wealth than most people could imagine. But by 2013, he's an old man at the end of his life, riddled with disease, and he's been thinking about Logan's gift for a very long time. When Logan arrives in Japan, Yoshida makes him an offer. He says he can transfer Logan's healing factor out of his body, free him from the immortality that has turned his life into an endless cycle of loss. Logan would finally be able to grow old and eventually find peace. In return, Yoshida would receive the healing factor and use it to save his own life. Logan turns him down. He doesn't trust it, and he's not ready to hand over the one thing that's kept him alive through everything. But that night, while Logan sleeps, Yoshida's personal physician, a mutant named Viper, injects something into his body, a robotic parasite that attaches to his heart and starts suppressing his healing factor. Logan doesn't realize it yet, but from that moment on, he's vulnerable in a way he hasn't been in over 100 years. The next morning, Yoshida is announced to have passed. At the funeral, everything falls apart. Yoshida had a son named Shingen, but he didn't trust him with the empire. Shingen had become more interested in power and politics than in honoring the family's legacy, and Yoshida saw that clearly. So he skipped his own son entirely and left everything to Shingen's daughter Mariko, his granddaughter. But here's the thing. Long before Yoshida passed, Shingen had already arranged for Mariko to marry a man named Nobuo Mori, a corrupt politician serving as Japan's Minister of Justice. It had nothing to do with love. It was a political deal. Shingen's way of locking in connections while he waited to take over. He assumed the empire would come to him, and Mariko would stay under his control. But the will changed everything. Once Mariko inherited, she could cancel the wedding, cut Shingen out entirely, and run things on her own terms. Shingen realized he was about to lose everything he'd spent years building toward, and that's when he went to the Yakuza. They make their move at the funeral, and Logan steps in to protect her, but he's getting hurt and not healing the way he should. For the first time in his life, Logan is fighting while his body is actually breaking down. He bleeds and it doesn't stop. He takes hits and they stay with him. Logan gets Mariko out and the two go on the run together, hiding in the countryside while Shingen and the Yakuza keep hunting them. During this time, Logan is getting worse. Every wound lingers, every fight costs him more than it should, and he can't figure out why. What he doesn't know yet is that without his healing factor constantly compensating, the adamantium bonded to his skeleton is slowly poisoning him from the inside. The same metal that made him nearly indestructible is now working against him. He and Mariko grow closer while he tries to keep her alive, but eventually, Shingen's people catch up and take her. Meanwhile, Yukio has a vision of Logan dying. She tracks him down to warn him. Now Logan knows two things. Mariko is gone, and something is wrong with his body. He and Yukio grab one of the kidnappers and get a name out of him. Nobuo Mori, Mariko's fiancé. They go straight to his apartment and Logan shakes the truth out of him. Mori confesses that Shingen was behind all of it, that he conspired with the Yakuza to have Mariko taken out because Yoshida left the empire to her instead of him. Shingen had been bleeding the company dry, covering his father's obsession with prolonging his life, stockpiling adamantium in a lab up north, and he expected to be rewarded for his loyalty. Instead, Yoshida skipped him entirely. That's what set everything in motion. From there, Logan and Yukio head to Yoshida's estate looking for Mariko. When they arrive, the place is a mess. Bodies on the floor. The Black Clan, a group of ninjas sworn to protect the Yoshida family, had stormed in and taken Mariko. Their leader, a man named Harada, who was also Mariko's former lover, moved her to a research facility somewhere in the mountains. Viper had been there too, and on her way out, she poisoned Shingen, leaving him wounded but alive. Logan wants to go after Mariko immediately, but he can barely stand. He's been bleeding and not healing for days, and it's only getting worse. They're standing in the estate of a man who spent his final years surrounded by every piece of medical technology money could buy. Logan scans his own body and finds a robotic parasite clamped directly onto his heart, suppressing his healing factor from the inside. Logan cuts himself open and tears the device out of his own chest, which nearly ends him in the process. That's when Shingen comes for him. Wounded, Desperate, wearing his family's traditional samurai armor, Shingen blames Logan for everything. His father's obsession with mutants, with Logan specifically, is what ruined this family. Yukio holds him off long enough for Logan to recover, and once his healing factor kicks back in, Logan finishes the fight with Shingen. Now back to full strength, Logan heads for the facility in the mountains. He knows it's a trap, but he goes anyway. When he gets there, Harada's ninjas overwhelm him, capture him, and drag him inside. They strap him into a machine, and that's where he finds out the truth. Yoshida isn't gone at all. He faked everything. The old man had built himself a massive suit of adamantium armor, the Silver Samurai, and his plan all along was to extract Logan's healing factor by force. Everything. Yukio's mission, the offer, the funeral, all of it was a setup to get Logan to Japan and take what he wanted. The Silver Samurai's adamantium blades are superheated, able to cut through anything, including Logan's claws. But Logan doesn't go down easy. He breaks free and fights back, but the samurai is unlike anything he's faced. It severs Logan's adamantium claws clean off, exposing the bone underneath, and then clamps down on the stumps to begin draining Logan's healing factor directly out of his body. Yoshida starts to de-age right in front of him, getting younger with every second as Logan's regeneration is pulled out of him. But Mariko intervenes, driving Logan's own severed claws into Yoshida, and Logan's body does something it hasn't done since the Weapon X procedure. His bone claws grow back. The original claws, the ones he was born with, push through the metal stumps, and Logan finishes the fight for good. After the fight, Logan has one final vision of Jean, but this time, instead of being pulled into the guilt, he lets her go. He accepts what happened and chooses to keep living. Yukio stays by his side as his self-appointed bodyguard, and Logan leaves Japan a different man than when he arrived, still carrying scars, but no longer drowning in them. And now he's walking around with bone claws instead of adamantium, which changes things going forward. 2 years later, Logan is passing through an airport when the metal objects around him start shaking. Coins floating, keys rattling, luggage shifting on the conveyor belt. He knows exactly what that means. He turns around and Magneto is standing right behind him, powers fully restored, proving that the cure was never permanent. Eric tells Logan that something is coming, a threat to every mutant alive, and he needs Logan's help. Logan asks why he would ever trust him, and then every person in the airport freezes in place, completely still, as if time itself stopped. Charles Xavier rolls through the crowd in his wheelchair, alive, looking exactly like himself. Logan can barely process it. The last time he saw this man, the Phoenix had taken him from them. Xavier looks at Logan and says, "As I told you once before, you are not the only one with gifts." Now, we established that Xavier transferred his consciousness into a comatose patient, a completely different person. So why does he look exactly like Charles Xavier? Same face, same voice, same wheelchair? The timeline never explains it, no one ever asks, and Xavier never offers anything beyond that one line. It's a plot hole, and we're calling it one. What matters is that Charles Xavier is back, and the fact that both he and Magneto have come to find Logan together, two men who have spent their entire lives on opposite sides, tells you everything you need to know. But the timeline never tells us what happened after that airport. We don't know what they tried, we don't know how they fought back, and we don't know how it all fell apart. All we know is that by 2023, it didn't matter. The world is gone. Not in ruin, not in decline, gone. Remember what we told you at the very beginning, how Mystique's DNA was reverse engineered into the Sentinels, giving them the ability to adapt to any mutant power in real time? This is where that road ends. Those machines have hunted down nearly every mutant on the planet, and they didn't stop there. Humans who carried the potential to produce mutant offspring were targeted too, along with anyone who tried to protect them. Entire cities emptied out, civilizations collapsed, and what's left of the mutant population is scattered, hiding, running from machines that cannot be beaten. The only reason any mutants are still alive at all is because of Kitty Pryde. Kitty's original power was phasing, the ability to pass through solid matter. But over the years of fighting for survival, she developed something entirely new. She figured out how to project a person's consciousness backward in time into their younger body. The way it worked was simple but brilliant. Every time the Sentinels tracked them down, Kitty would send Bishop, one of the surviving mutants, back a few days into the past with full knowledge of exactly where and when the Sentinels would strike. Bishop would warn the group,
They'd relocate before the machines ever arrived, and the attack would never happen. They'd been running this loop over and over, staying one step ahead by rewriting the last few days every time the Sentinels closed in. That's the only reason anyone made it this far. But by the time the last survivors gather in a monastery in China, it's clear this can't go on. Xavier, Magneto, Storm, Wolverine, Kitty Pryde, Iceman, Colossus, Bishop, Blink, Warpath, Sunspot, and a handful of others. The Sentinels are getting faster, smarter, and there are fewer places left to hide. The short jumps aren't enough anymore, so Xavier proposes something far more extreme. Don't go back days, go back decades. Use the same power Kitty has been using to save them in short bursts, but push it all the way to 1973. To the moment before Mystique takes out Trask. If that one decision changes, Mystique is never captured, the Sentinels never get her DNA, and this future never happens. The problem is that going back 50 years would tear apart anyone's mind. The only person who could survive the process is Logan, because his healing factor can repair the neurological damage in real time. So Kitty sends Wolverine's consciousness back into his younger body in 1973, and he wakes up with his original bone claws, no adamantium, in a completely different world. The 1973 he finds is bleak. Xavier's school has been closed for years, most of the students drafted into Vietnam. Hank McCoy is still there, but Xavier himself is a broken man. He's been taking a serum that suppresses his telepathy in exchange for letting him walk again. The trade tells you everything about where his head is at. He'd rather have his legs than his mind. Magneto is locked in a concrete cell beneath the Pentagon, accused of curving the bullet that took out President Kennedy. And Mystique is already on Trask's trail, moving through the shadows with nothing but rage and a list. Logan has to pull all of these people back together. He convinces Xavier and Beast to help him break Magneto out of the Pentagon, and they recruit a young mutant named Peter Maximoff, a speedster whose ability to move faster than anything alive makes the prison break possible. But once Magneto is free, he starts playing his own game. He doesn't just want to stop the Sentinel Program, he wants to demonstrate mutant superiority. At the Paris Peace Accords, where Mystique is about to make her move on Trask, Magneto tries to handle the situation his own way by turning on Mystique himself, reasoning that if she's gone, her DNA can never be harvested. She escapes, but the damage is done. The world has now seen mutants fighting each other in broad daylight, and Nixon greenlights the Sentinel Program and schedules a public unveiling on the White House lawn, a show of force to prove humanity can protect itself. Magneto sees this as the moment to send a message of his own, not just to the government, but to the entire world. Mystique is still out there, and she hasn't given up on Trask. She's making her way toward Washington with the same mission she's had from the start. And Logan, Xavier, and Beast are racing to get there first, trying to reach her before she does something that can't be undone.
Everything collides at the White House. Xavier, Logan, and Beast are in the crowd searching for Mystique when Xavier spots her, disguised as a Secret Service agent. He telepathically freezes her before she can make her move and starts trying to talk her down. But before he can finish, Magneto arrives. He drops an entire baseball stadium around the White House as a perimeter, commandeers the Sentinel prototypes, and turns them against the humans. In the chaos, Logan goes after Magneto, but Magneto drives metal rebar straight through his body and hurls him into the Potomac River. Logan is out. Nixon, Trask, and Mystique, still disguised as Secret Service, are rushed into an underground bunker beneath the White House. But Magneto rips the entire bunker out of the ground, tearing it from the building and exposing everyone inside. Meanwhile, back in 2023, the Sentinels have found the monastery. The last X-Men are fighting for their lives, and they are losing, falling one by one. The future and the past are running out at the same time. With the bunker torn open and cameras rolling, Mystique steps out disguised as Nixon, a gun behind her back. But Magneto is still standing between her and Trask, and as long as he's in control, no one is getting close to anyone. While he's distracted dealing with one of his own Sentinels, Mystique takes her shot. A plastic gun, no metal, nothing he can sense coming. She grazes his neck and knocks him out. Now it's just her and Trask. This is the moment she's been building towards since 1973, but Xavier reaches her telepathically. He doesn't command her, he doesn't control her. He asks her to choose. And Mystique, the woman who has spent her life being told what she is and what she should be, makes the choice on her own. She lowers it,
and she spares Trask, all of it happening on camera with the entire world watching. A mutant just saved the President of the United States. In that single moment, public perception shifts. The Sentinel Program is canceled. Trask is arrested for selling military secrets to foreign governments, and the future begins to rewrite itself.
Back in 2023, seconds before the Sentinels wipe out the last survivors, the timeline dissolves. Everything changes. Wolverine wakes up in a bed at Xavier's school, and the world he sees is nothing like the one he left. The mansion is full of students, Beast is walking the halls, and Storm is teaching. And then he sees Jean Grey and Scott Summers, alive, going about their day as if nothing ever happened. All of it. The Phoenix, Alcatraz, the Cure, all of it either happened differently or never happened at all. Xavier finds Logan standing in the hallway, barely able to process what he's seeing. And when Logan tells him the last thing he remembers is drowning, Xavier understands exactly what's going on. See, when Kitty sent Logan's mind back to 1973, she put his future consciousness into his younger body. That younger body lived from 1973 all the way to 2023 in the new timeline. But it wasn't the same Logan driving. The Logan who woke up in that hallway went straight from drowning in a river in 1973 to standing in Xavier's school in 2023. Everything in between, 50 years of history in a completely different timeline. He never experienced any of it. Wolverine made it back, and the timeline has been rewritten from 1973 forward. But there's one more thing. Back in 1973, after Logan was thrown into the Potomac, someone pulls him out of the water. It looks like William Stryker, the same man who turned Logan into a weapon the first time around. But if you were paying attention, you'd notice something off. That's not Stryker. It's Mystique, wearing his face. Why she saved him, what she did with him after, and how Logan still ended up with adamantium bonded to his skeleton again, we'll get back to all of that. This is the new Earth 10,005. Everything from this point on follows a different path. The events we covered before, the Cure, the Phoenix, Alcatraz, Xavier's consciousness transfer, none of that plays out the same way in this new timeline. What happens instead is an entirely different sequence of events, and it starts with something ancient waking up. On Earth 616, in 1980, a man walks into a small town in Missouri. He has a human face, a warm smile, and the kind of effortless charm that makes strangers feel like they've known him for years. Nobody in that town knows what he actually is. Nobody would believe it if they were told. His name is Ego, and that name is not an attitude. It is literally what he is, Ego, the living planet. Long before he ever set foot on Earth, before he ever wore a human face, Ego was something the universe had never quite seen before. A celestial consciousness that woke up alone in the dark of space with no body, no world, no one else around. Just a mind becoming slowly aware of itself. We've talked about the Celestials before, those ancient, godlike cosmic beings that existed since nearly the beginning of everything. Ego was one of them, but different. Where other Celestials had form and purpose from the start, Ego began as nothing but a brain, a raw point of awareness drifting through the void. Over millions of years, he taught himself to do what no other being had done. He reached out with his consciousness and pulled matter toward him, shaping it layer by layer until he had built an entire planet around himself. Not found a planet, not landed on one, built one from the inside out, using nothing but his own will and celestial power. That planet was him. Every rock, every ocean, every mountain, all of it an extension of his body and his mind. But a planet cannot walk, cannot talk, cannot reach out and touch other life. So somewhere across those millions of years, Ego figured out how to wear a human face. And when he stood in front of you, you'd never guess you were looking at a planet. And Ego used that body to travel. He crossed galaxies and visited thousands of worlds and encountered more forms of life than anyone could count. But the more he saw, the more hollow it all felt. Other life seemed small to him, limited, brief, unremarkable. He began to feel that there was only one thing in the universe that truly deserved to exist, only one consciousness worth spreading across the stars, and that consciousness was his own. He called it the expansion. Across thousands of years, Ego had visited planet after planet and quietly planted biological extensions of himself beneath the surfaces. Seeds, essentially,
made from his own matter, embedded deep in the ground of worlds across the galaxy, completely dormant, waiting. When the moment came and enough celestial energy was poured into them, those seeds would activate all at once and begin to grow, consuming every planet they were planted in, transforming entire worlds into new pieces of ego, spreading him across the universe until everything that existed was him and nothing else was left. Every civilization, every species, every living thing absorbed. Not out of cruelty exactly, but out of a kind of cosmic arrogance so complete that other life simply did not register to him as worth keeping. But activating all those seeds at once required more celestial power than ego alone could generate, and there were no other celestials he could reach, so he decided to make one. So on every world he visited, he took a different form, charmed the dominant species, formed relationships, and had children. Thousands of them, spread across dozens of worlds, each one a potential heir to his power. He hired a crew of space pirates called the Ravagers to collect those children once they were old enough and bring them to him. But child after child failed the test. They had his face sometimes, his curiosity, but not his power. Without the celestial gene passed down strongly enough, they were useless to the plan. And ego, without much sentiment about it, ended those children's lives and moved on to the next world. Then he came to Earth, and in a small town in Missouri in 1980, he met a woman named Meredith, and for the first time in millions of years, something actually got through to him. He loved her, genuinely, in whatever way a being like ego was capable of love. He kept coming back to her 3 times, which was 3 times more than he'd ever returned to anyone. But that love was exactly the problem, because ego knew that if he came back a 4th time, he would never leave, and the expansion, the entire reason for his existence, would be over. So he made the hardest decision he'd ever made, and he didn't come back. What he left behind was a boy named Peter Quill, born from a human woman and a living planet. The kid who would one day call himself Star-Lord. But that's a story for later.
But the 1980s had more in store than one cosmic origin story. And not just on this Earth. Over on Earth 10,005, something had been waiting beneath the sands of ancient Egypt for a very, very long time. His name was En-Saba Nur, and his story didn't start in 1983. It started thousands of years before that. Born in ancient Egypt, En-Saba Nur came into the world gray-skinned and strange-looking, abandoned as an infant because he didn't look like anyone else. A group of desert wanderers found him, took him in, and raised him. They gave him his name, En-Saba Nur, meaning the first one, and that name was more accurate than anyone knew, because he was the very first mutant who ever existed. But the reason that was even possible goes back long before he was born. Over 1 million years before, the Celestials, those ancient godlike cosmic beings we've talked about before, came to Earth and altered the genetic code of early humans, burying a dormant sequence deep in the human genome that would be passed down silently from parent to child across hundreds of thousands of years. That buried code was what would eventually become the X gene, the genetic difference that, when it finally switches on, gives a person abilities far beyond anything a normal human can do. As En-Saba Nur grew, his powers became clear. He could transfer his mind and essence into other mutants' bodies, absorbing their abilities each time he made the jump. He used this to live forever, moving from one mutant body to the next across centuries, stacking power upon power with every transfer, growing stronger with every generation. Civilizations rose and fell around him, and he was there for all of it, with different cultures worshipping him under different names. And wherever he went, he kept 4 devoted followers by his side, his horsemen, people he personally empowered to serve and protect him. But in 3600 BC, during one of his transfers, his own subjects had finally had enough. Some had grown to see him not as a god, but as someone who had taken too much, a false god who governed through intimidation and kept his people under his thumb. The ritual itself was an elaborate process that took place inside his pyramid, a structure specifically built to funnel sunlight down through its peak and into the transfer chamber below, where that light acted as the power source for moving his consciousness from one body to the next. It was during one of these ceremonies, with En-Saba Nur mid-transfer and completely vulnerable, that a group of conspirators struck,
physically blocking the sunlight from entering the pyramid and cutting the power to the ritual before it could be completed. Without the light, the transfer froze halfway through, leaving En-Sabah-Nur trapped between bodies, and the conspirators then brought the entire structure down on top of him. His horsemen fought back with everything they had, holding off the attackers for as long as they could, but one by one they fell as the pyramid collapsed around them. The last one standing, a woman with telekinetic abilities, used the final moments of her life to wrap a protective shield around En-Sabah-Nur's body, keeping the falling stones from crushing him as she took her final breath. Because of her sacrifice, he survived, buried, frozen, and suspended between two bodies, but alive, sealed beneath the rubble for thousands of years.
But stories have a way of surviving, even when the people who live them don't. For thousands of years, En-Sabah-Nur existed as nothing more than a half-forgotten myth carved into Egyptian ruins. A god king who ruled, who was betrayed, who disappeared. That changed in 1973, when Magneto moved against the president on live television and Mystique stopped him in front of the entire world. Mutants stopped being a rumor. Governments began treating them as a security concern. People started to see them as some kind of second coming or sign of God. Some formed groups, digging into ancient history for answers. In Egypt, a group of people formed a cult around the legend of En-Sabah-Nur, an ancient being they believed to be the world's first. They called themselves Ashir En-Sabah-Nur, traced the clues carved into ancient ruins, and eventually found his pyramid. The CIA had been tracking groups like these since '73. One of the agents assigned to that work was Moira McTaggart. Her story begins the same way it did in the old timeline. She was a CIA analyst who worked closely with Xavier and the first generation of mutants in the early 1960s, through the recruitment, the training, the Cuban Missile Crisis. But what I didn't tell you before is how that chapter ended. Xavier used his telepathy to wipe her memory completely. Every face, every mission, every moment she had spent in that world, gone. He did it to protect the people she knew, but what he couldn't wipe was the shape of the absence itself. Moira spent the years after that with a feeling she couldn't name, a sense that there was a part of her life she couldn't account for. It kept steering her back toward the same work, the same corners of the world where strange things happened around people who weren't entirely ordinary. She didn't know why she was so good at finding them. She just was. That trail brought her to Cairo, undercover, moving through the market in a full niqab. She found what looked like a front, a small outdoor restaurant, people cooking and serving food, nothing unusual at first glance. Then she noticed the tattoos on their necks. She was in the right place. She slipped past them without being noticed. In the back courtyard, one of them stood guard over a rug laid flat on the ground. When she got too close, he gestured her away. This area was private. She caught him off guard with a kick, disarmed him, and put him down before he could react. She pulled back the rug, found the opening underneath, and dropped inside. What she didn't do was cover it back up behind her. Below, she found herself in old ruins buried beneath the modern city, layers of history built on top of each other. And there, visible through the rubble, was the tip of a pyramid. She was only there for recon, pictures, proof, something to bring back to Langley. But deeper inside, the cult had already gathered around the pyramid, mid-ritual, chanting over En-Sabah-Nur's sealed form. She hadn't expected any of this. She stayed back, kept her distance, and watched. None of them noticed her. But none of that mattered. The sunlight she had let in through the uncovered entrance was already hitting the gold panels and ancient mechanisms lining the walls. The same sun-powered technology that had been built into that pyramid thousands of years ago for exactly this purpose. It powered everything back up. Combined with the ritual, it was enough. When En-Sabah-Nur rose, the entire chamber came down around them. Earthquakes rippled out across the globe. Moira barely made it out. The followers who brought him back didn't. On the other side of the world, at Xavier School in Westchester, Jean Grey was having the worst night she'd ever had. Her powers were spiraling in her sleep, telekinesis pulling at the walls of her room, the surface cracking and peeling like something was eating through it from the inside. And she'd woken up the entire dorm doing it. Hank was already aware of what was happening and called Charles, and by the time Charles wheeled himself into her bedroom, she was still asleep. still struggling, her power pouring out of her with nothing holding it back. He moved close, reached into her mind to try and calm her down, and the moment their thoughts synced, he saw exactly what she was seeing. The world on fire, everything burning, and somewhere in the middle of it, just for a flash, something ancient. He called her name and pulled her out of it. She woke up gasping and told him she had seen the end of the world, that she could feel all the death, that it felt real. Charles told her it was just a dream, but she pushed back. This wasn't like her telepathy. This wasn't telekinesis losing control in her sleep. This was something else entirely, something she had never felt before. And since we're talking about Jean, this is the new timeline's version of her. She'd been living at Xavier's school for a while by this point. Here we actually got to see her come up, a teenager, still figuring out her powers, still the girl the other students were afraid of. We even got to see how she met Scott. Not long before all of this, a new kid had arrived at the school, Scott Summers. His powers had come out of nowhere at his regular school, optic blasts he had no control over, couldn't even open his eyes without destroying something. His older brother Alex brought him in, the same Alex Summers who had been part of Xavier's original team back in the 60s. Cuba, the training, all of it. He knew the school was the only place that could help his little brother. Xavier took Scott outside to test what he could do, and the kid ended up cutting one of Charles's favorite trees clean in half. One of the first people Scott crossed paths with after that was Jean, and there was something between them right away. That's where it started. But let's get back to that night. Charles took her word for it. They let her rest and stepped out, and that's when Hank told him. He had picked up something earlier that night in his lab, some kind of energy tremor, and the epicenter was halfway around the world. They went down to Cerebro to look into it, and when Charles connected, he found Moira, on site in Cairo, pulling herself out of what looked like the aftermath of something catastrophic. He decided he would pay her a visit at Langley and see what she knew. While all of this was happening, we also need to talk about Magneto, because what was going on in his life at this point matters a lot for what comes next. After the events of '73, after the world saw him move against the president on live television, Eric Lenscher became the most wanted fugitive on the planet, so he disappeared. He went as far from the noise as he could, all the way to Poland, changed his name to Henryk Gurski, got a job at a steel mill, and built himself a life no one would ever think to look for him in. He married a woman named Magda, had a daughter named Nina, and for the first time in his life, he was just a man coming home at the end of the day, tucking his kid into bed, singing her the songs his parents used to sing him. He was living the life he never thought he'd get to have. When En Sabah Nur woke up and that tremor rippled out across the world, it reached all the way to Poland. At the factory, the ground shook and a massive vat of molten metal tipped and was about to come down on one of his coworkers, and Eric didn't think. He just reached out and held it in place with his power and saved the man's life. The coworkers who saw it said nothing to him at the time, but when he got home that night, he already knew what was coming. He grabbed the family's passports, told Magda they were leaving, and started getting ready to go. But Nina had been outside playing in the forest like she always did, and when they went looking for her, that's when Eric and Magda found out that his coworkers hadn't stayed quiet at all. They'd gone straight to the police. The officers were waiting in the woods, and they had Nina with them. They'd come without guns because they knew exactly who they were dealing with, armed instead with bows and arrows, nothing metal on them. They told Eric they just wanted to talk, asked if he was the man they thought he was. He tried to hold the line, said his name was Henryk Gurski, reminded them he was their neighbor, their co-worker, that he'd eaten dinner in their homes. But one of them pulled out a newspaper clipping and asked him directly whether he was the one they called Magneto. There was no point in lying anymore, so he told them to release his daughter and he would turn himself in. They let her go, and Eric gave himself up. But as Nina ran into her mother's arms, the girl saw them taking her father away and started to break down. She was crying, saying she wouldn't let them take him from her, and then something happened that none of them expected. Nina was a mutant too. The birds in the forest, the ones she'd always had a way with, came swarming down on the officers, attacking them from every direction, and she couldn't stop it even if she wanted to. The police shouted at Eric to make her stop, and he told them she couldn't control it. In all that chaos,
One of the officers flinched and his bow released, and the arrow hit them both. Nina and Magda, mother and daughter, still holding each other. They didn't make it. Eric rushed to them, dropped to the ground, and held them, but they were already gone. He took the locket from around Nina's neck, the one he had given Magda, and without even standing up, he used it to take out every last officer in that clearing. Hold that thought on Eric. His story is far from over.
Back in Cairo, Sabah Nur walked out of the rubble and into a world he didn't recognize. Cars and radios and markets and humans rushing around accumulating things, building empires out of money and weapons instead of strength and power. Everywhere he looked, ordinary humans were in charge, governing, dictating, deciding who mattered and who didn't. And mutants, the ones who should have been above all of it, were nowhere, hiding, blending in, shrinking themselves down to survive in a world built by people weaker than them. The longer he walked, the more certain he became. This world had not just lost its way, it had been handed over to the wrong people entirely. And then he saw something that made it all worse. While moving through the market, he came across a teenage girl using a small weather ability to create a dust disturbance and slip away with stolen food. Her name was Aurora Monroe, and if you remember, in the previous Earth 10,005 timeline, she was already standing alongside Xavier's X-Men at full power. No origin, no backstory, just there. Now in this new timeline, we actually get to see where she came from. A street kid, surviving alone in Cairo the only way she knew how. To Sabah Nur, the sight of it was almost offensive. A mutant with the ability to command the weather itself, one of the most extraordinary gifts the X gene could produce, and she was using it to steal bread. This was what the world had done to his kind. When the men she'd stolen from caught up to her and cornered her, Sabah Nur stepped in, and what he did to those men made very clear that nothing about him had weakened in thousands of years underground. Aurora brought him back to her home, and there he sat in front of her television. And using his ability to absorb knowledge at a rate no human mind could match, he pulled in thousands of years of human history in minutes. Every war, every empire that rose and fell, every false idol humanity had built for itself while he was gone. By the time the screen stopped cycling, he had seen enough. Humanity had lost its way. The weak had inherited the earth, and the strong had been pushed to the edges. He decided it all had to come down and be rebuilt from the ground up, and he would be the one to do it. Aurora pushed back, told him you couldn't fix the world by going around eliminating everyone in your way, that there were laws, systems, people who kept things in order. He let her finish. Then he looked at her, really looked at her, a girl sleeping on the floor of a crumbling building, stealing food to survive in a world that had no idea what she was capable of, and turned it back on her. Were those laws working for her? Were those systems protecting her? Or had she just gotten so used to living inside a cage that she'd started defending the bars? She didn't have an answer for that. He stepped toward her, placed his hands on her, and reached into the part of her the world had spent her whole life telling her to keep quiet. Her hair turned white, her eyes went pale. The girl who had been stealing bread in the market that morning became something else entirely. She became Storm, his first horseman, and she already knew exactly where to start looking for the rest. Back in the States, Charles had already made his way to Langley to pay Moira that visit. She told him everything she'd seen, the chamber, the cult, the ancient sealed form, the moment it all came down around her. Between what she had witnessed underground and what the CIA had been piecing together through the Ashir en Sabah Nur cult for years, a picture started coming together. An ancient mutant, thousands of years old, the first one who ever existed, and now awake. And while Charles was away, someone walked back through the doors of the mansion that nobody had seen in years. After 1973, after the whole world watched Mystique stop Magneto on live television and mutants stopped being a rumor, Raven had gone off the grid. She'd wanted to go after Trask, the man whose work had nearly led to the extermination of their kind, and she'd made it clear she wasn't interested in doing things Charles's way anymore. So she disappeared. But disappearing didn't mean hiding. For years, she'd been moving through Europe, using her ability to become anyone to go places no one else could and get mutants out of situations no one else would touch. She had made it her mission to find mutants in danger and get them out. That's what brought her to East Berlin. She'd caught wind of an underground fight club running mutants as entertainment, forcing them into cages to fight each other for crowds who paid to watch. One of them was a young, blue-skinned mutant named Kurt Wagner, a boy who could teleport, who had been taken and put in that circuit because his appearance made him a spectacle. Raven got him out. But getting a mutant with blue skin and a tail out of East Germany quietly wasn't simple, and she needed help. Someone who knew how to move people across borders without leaving a trace. That's how she ended up at Caliban's door. He was the name you heard if you needed something done in the mutant underground. A broker, someone who could locate any mutant anywhere and facilitate just about anything for the right price. Raven went to him to arrange Nightcrawler's passage out of the country, and while she was there, Caliban asked her if she remembered Eric. His network had picked up a flash of him somewhere in Poland. Things had gone very wrong, and his family hadn't made it out. Would be on the news soon enough. That was enough for Raven. She brought Kurt with her and came home. When Raven walked back through the doors of the mansion, the first face she saw was Hank's. He hadn't seen her since she walked away, and the surprise on his face was impossible to hide. Charles was still at Langley. The mansion was quieter than it used to be, and Raven was standing in the entrance with a blue teleporting teenager and news about Eric that nobody was going to want to hear. While all of that was playing out on the other side of the world, En Sabah Nur wasn't waiting. Storm led him straight to Caliban, the same broker Raven had just visited in East Berlin. Caliban had a gift for tracking mutants, and Storm knew if anyone could point them toward the kind of power En Sabah Nur was looking for, it was him. But Caliban didn't work for free, and when En Sabah Nur made clear he had no currency to offer, things got hostile fast. It didn't matter. Caliban's enforcer, a mutant named Psylocke, stepped forward to protect her boss, and that moment of defiance was all En Sabah Nur needed. He showed her what she could become. She looked at Caliban, then back at him, and she walked away from the only life she'd known to become the second horseman. 2 horsemen now, and En Sabah Nur still had 2 more to find. Psylocke knew exactly who was nearby. A mutant named Angel, the same fighter from that underground circuit where Raven had found Kurt. Angel had actually been one of the fighters Kurt was forced to go up against, and in that fight, Kurt had teleported him into the electric fence surrounding the cage and damaged one of his wings badly. After that, Angel's life fell apart. A mutant built to fly, grounded, with nothing left to show for it but a broken wing and a bottle. When En Sabah Nur and his horsemen walked in on him, Angel told them to get lost. He wasn't interested. But En Sabah Nur didn't leave. He reached out, and where there had been torn feathers and broken bone, metal grew. New wings, sharper, stronger, built for something far beyond what Angel had ever been before. Angel looked at what he'd become and didn't say no again. He was the 3rd horseman, and En Sabah Nur renamed him Archangel, his angel of death. With 3 horsemen now, Psylocke already knew exactly who belonged in the 4th seat. She'd been at Caliban's when word about Eric came through the network, and she knew where he'd be. Back in Poland, Eric was done grieving. He'd gone back to the steel mill, not to work, not to hide, but to stand in front of the people who had smiled at him for years and then handed him over the moment they found out what he was. And when he got there, he was quiet. Not angry, not desperate, just done. He walked in like a man who had nothing left to lose and all the power in the world to prove it, and every single person in that room felt it the second he stepped through the door. He let the silence sit for a moment. Then he spoke. He told them that some of them had spoken to the police about what they thought they saw, and that if they wanted to know his powers, if they wanted to see what he could really do, he would show them. He told them to think about the person they loved most in their life, their wife, their mother, their daughter, and he told them that now that person would know what it felt like to lose someone they loved and to carry that pain forever. One of them begged him to stop, called him Henrik. Eric looked at him and said his name wasn't Henrik. His name was Magneto. That's when En Sabah Nur showed up. He teleported into the mill with his 3 horsemen standing behind him, and Eric, still holding that locket, still standing over the men who had ruined his life, turned around and told whoever this was not to try and stop him from doing what he came there to do. En-Sabah-Nur didn't flinch. He looked past Eric at the workers, and before Eric could even turn back around, every single one of them was pulled into the ground and gone. Eric just stood there. Then En-Sabah-Nur told him he wasn't there for them, he was there for him. And to prove it, he took Eric somewhere no one had ever dared take him before. They teleported to Auschwitz, the camp where Eric's parents had been ripped away from him when he was just a boy, the place where his powers had first broken through. Eric told him he shouldn't have brought him there, but En-Sabah-Nur wasn't trying to hurt him, he was trying to unlock him. He told Eric to reach down into the earth, to feel the metal buried deep beneath the ground, deeper than he'd ever reached before, and to understand that he had always had the power to move the world itself. And Eric did. The ruins around him began to shake, and everything the camp had ever been started coming apart. Eric didn't need much more convincing after that. He became the 4th Horseman. Back at the mansion, Charles had returned from Langley and brought Moira with him. She had seen something under Cairo that went beyond anything the CIA files could explain, and Charles wanted her close while they figured out what they were dealing with. When he walked into his office, Raven was already there, sitting at his desk like she'd never left. They hadn't spoken in years, but Raven didn't waste time on the reunion. She had news that couldn't wait. She told Charles what the world outside looked like from where she'd been standing. Mutants living in fear, hiding, shrinking themselves down just to survive. And Eric, a man who had tried harder than anyone to live a quiet life, had just lost everything all over again. She said it plainly. Mutants needed to stop running and learn how to protect themselves, and Charles needed to be the one teaching them how to do that, not just how to blend in. Charles took it in. Then he gathered everyone and they went down to Cerebro. They needed to find Eric before someone else did. He put on the helmet, expanded his mind outward, and found him almost immediately. The grief coming off Eric was so raw that Charles could feel it from across the world. He reached out and made contact, told Eric he knew what he'd lost, told him to come back so they could help him. Eric wasn't hearing it. He told Charles that just because he could see inside his head didn't mean he understood anything about what it felt like. Charles asked him to think about his wife, about his daughter, about what they would have wanted. Eric went quiet for a moment, and then he said they would have wanted to live. He told Charles he had tried it his way, tried to be like them, tried to live like them, but it always ended the same. They took everything from him. Now he was going to take everything from them, and En-Sabah-Nur was standing right there when that conversation happened. He sensed the telepathic link, and through it, he sensed something extraordinary on the other end. A machine that could amplify a mind to reach the entire planet. Before Charles could pull out, En-Sabah-Nur reached into the connection and seized control of it. He hijacked Cerebro through Charles's own mind, and he saw his opportunity. If he was going to tear this world down and rebuild it, he needed to make sure humanity couldn't fight back. Their weapons were the only thing that made them dangerous, the only reason the weak had been able to hold power over the strong for this long. So he used Cerebro to reach into the heads of every military commander, every world leader, every person on Earth with their hand near a launch code, and he made them act. Every projectile, every piece of the global arsenal, sent into space, gone in minutes. Humanity's reach, cut off all at once. While En-Sabah-Nur was using him as a conduit, Charles was fighting it from the inside, trying to push him out, trying to take back control of his own mind. He called out to Hank to shut Cerebro down, but the machine was locked. En-Sabah-Nur had it completely. They couldn't turn it off, couldn't disconnect it, couldn't pull Charles out. That's when Charles realized there was only one option left. He told Alex to take Cerebro apart entirely. And Alex didn't hesitate. The connection broke. Charles came back to himself, but it was already too late. Sabah Nur had seen everything he needed to see. He teleported straight into the mansion with all four horsemen at his side, seized Xavier, and prepared to leave. Alex threw everything he had at them trying to stop it, but Sabah Nur was already teleporting out when the blast left Alex's body. It hit the wrong wall. The energy tore through into the underground hangar where Hank's experimental jet was stored, and the power core went up. The whole mansion was about to come down with it. Peter Maximoff had been on his way to the mansion that day for his own reasons. Reasons he hadn't told anyone yet. You might remember him, the kid who broke into the Pentagon and helped get Magneto out, moving so fast the guards never knew what hit them. He showed up that day and the building was already coming apart. He moved through every corridor, every room, every collapsing hallway, pulling people out one by one in fractions of a second. Students, teachers, anyone still inside. He got them all out. Almost. Alex had been closest to the blast. Peter was fast, but not fast enough for that. What saved Scott, Jean, and Kurt was pure luck. Earlier that evening, before any of this happened, the younger students had taken Kurt out. He'd never seen America, and they wanted to show him around. They ended up at the mall, caught a showing of Return of the Jedi, and by the time they made it back, the mansion was already burning. Scott got there and found his brother gone. There was no time to process it. In the chaos outside, a military helicopter descended, and William Stryker stepped out. You might remember Stryker from the previous timeline. The man who built Team X, ran the Weapon X program, put adamantium on Logan's bones. That version of him was older, further along in his obsession. This is the same man, a decade or so earlier, but the obsession was already there. The son of William Stryker Sr., the government man who interrogated Moira after first class. The apple didn't fall far. Still convinced that mutants were weapons to be seized and studied rather than people to be left alone. Raven recognized him the second he stepped out and tried to warn the others. But before anyone could react, his men fired a sonic blast that dropped everyone standing. Scott, Jean, and Kurt had only just arrived back from the mall and were far enough back that it didn't reach them. They pulled back into the ruins and stayed low. One of Stryker's soldiers did a final sweep through the wreckage. Jean held her breath and used her abilities to keep all three of them completely invisible until he passed. Stryker loaded Raven, Hank, Moira, and Peter onto the helicopter. The rotors started. The three of them looked at each other. They weren't going to just stand there and watch it leave. Kurt grabbed them both and teleported all three straight inside before it lifted off. They couldn't get the others out. The electrical lining inside the aircraft blocked Kurt's ability completely. So they stayed low, stayed hidden, and rode it all the way to Stryker's facility at Alkali Lake in Canada. No choice but to follow it to the end. Once inside, they moved carefully through the corridors, staying out of sight. Jean Grey using her abilities to keep them hidden from the guards while they searched for the others. The four of them woke up in a cell. Raven, Hank, Peter, Moira. The walls humming with something that kept their powers from working. Stryker wanted one thing: Xavier's location. They had nothing to give him, and he wasn't interested in anything else they had to say. While they waited, Peter finally told Raven the thing he'd been carrying since he showed up at the mansion. Magneto was his father. He'd known for a while. He just hadn't found the right moment. And this, apparently, was it. Then something shifted inside the facility. Every single person in that building heard a voice in their head at the same moment. Sabah Nur had taken Charles to Cairo, to the pyramid he was rebuilding at the center of the city. This was going to be his seat of power, the place from which he would reach into every mind on Earth and remake the world in his image. To announce himself to that world, he had amplified Charles's telepathy far beyond its normal reach and was forcing him to broadcast. No one could block it. No one could turn it off. Stryker heard it. His prisoners heard it. Every world leader, every soldier, every ordinary person going about their day heard it. But Jean heard something else. A second layer buried so deep inside the signal that only someone with her ability could have found it. Charles had hidden a message inside Sabah Nur's message, a location. He was telling her exactly where he was, right under Sabah Nur's nose. That was all they needed. But first, they had to get everyone out of this facility. Jean pushed further into the facility, and that's when she felt something she hadn't expected. A presence somewhere deeper in the facility, something alive and in tremendous pain, barely human anymore. Now, if you remember, the old Logan from the original Earth 10005 timeline was the one who traveled back to 1973 and changed everything. He went back specifically to create this timeline, to stop Mystique from killing Trask, to prevent the Sentinel Program from wiping out mutant kind. This is the world he fought to bring into existence. That older Logan rewrote history and stepped out of the story. This Logan, the one in this facility, is a younger version living in the timeline that was saved, and yet here he was, in Stryker's hands anyway. Mystique had pulled him out of the water at the end of Days of Future Past, but somewhere between then and now, Stryker had tracked him down and gotten him into this facility, for the first time in this timeline. This was where the Weapon X procedure had been done, right here. We know that because of what was found here later. Stryker had bonded indestructible metal to every bone in Logan's body, and the process had stripped him of everything. No memories, no identity, nothing left but the animal underneath. And for everyone asking how Logan still had his adamantium claws in the 2017 film, because in the Japan story he lost them, that's a different Logan entirely, a different timeline, and we'll get to that later. Back to Alkali Lake, the guards in the facility picked up on Jean, Scott, and Kurt before they could reach the others, and the three of them had no choice but to push through. In the middle of it all, Jean found the containment room and opened the cage. What came out was Logan. Nothing left of the man, just the animal. He went through every person in that facility on his way to the exit, and nobody could slow him down. Stryker heard what was happening, got to a helicopter, and left. Logan was heading for the door, about to disappear into the wilderness with nothing. No name, no past, nothing. Jean reached out to him telepathically before he could go. She moved through the wreckage of everything that had been taken from him, looking for anything still intact, and found the one thing left, his name. She gave it back to him. He stopped, looked at her for a moment, then he walked out into the wilderness alone. With the facility clear and Stryker gone, Scott was able to blast the cell door open and get Raven, Hank, Peter, and Moira out. They had what they came for. Now, they had somewhere to be. They found a plane in Stryker's hangar and pointed it toward Egypt. Sabah Nur had wasted no time in Cairo. He tore Cairo apart, using his own power to dismantle the city around him and reshape it into a pyramid rising at its center. Then he gave each horseman their role, Storm commanding the skies, Psylocke and Archangel holding the perimeter. And Magneto? His job wasn't the pyramid. His job was the world. Sabah Nur had unlocked something in Eric at Auschwitz, pushed his power to a level he'd never reached before, and now he sent him to stand outside and use it. Magneto pulled at the Earth's magnetic poles themselves, causing destruction across the entire planet simultaneously. Structures collapsing, cities shaking, chaos spreading everywhere at once. Then, Charles, still strapped inside, asked what his role was. Sabah Nur looked at him and told him his role was the most important of all, to be everywhere, to be everyone. The vessel through which Sabah Nur would reach into every mind on Earth at once and reshape the world from the inside. On the way, Raven took command. She split them into two groups. Jean, Scott, and Kurt would go straight into the pyramid and get Charles out before the transfer could be completed. She and Peter would find Eric. Cairo was unrecognizable by the time they got there. Meanwhile, Raven and Peter went straight for Eric. Peter used his speed to get Raven through Magneto's destruction and reach him. She stood in front of Eric and told him straight. He still had family. He still had people who cared about him. She looked at Peter, almost saying it but stopping herself. "You have more family than you know." Eric was listening but not moving. Jean, Scott, Kurt, and Hank moved toward the pyramid. The horsemen came out to stop them. Storm dropped from the sky and split the team apart with lightning. Psylocke went straight for Hank, no hesitation. Scott took on Storm, deflecting her strikes with his beams. Beast held his own against Psylocke. The fighting spread across the ruins of Cairo. While inside the pyramid, the transfer was already underway and getting closer to completion with every passing second. Kurt's job was to find Charles, but Angel was guarding the entrance and came straight for him. The two of them went at it through the debris, Kurt teleporting in and out to stay ahead of those wings. He finally managed to trap Angel in a cage of wreckage and bought himself a window. He teleported inside, found Charles, and pulled him out with seconds to spare. The transfer wasn't complete, but it had already started. Charles was unconscious. His hair was gone. Kurt got everyone back onto the jet.
Moira started the engines and they began to lift off. They were almost out. Then Angel broke free and flew Psylocke straight onto the top of the jet, and it was Psylocke cutting through the hull with her psychic energy. Jean slowed them down with everything she had while Kurt tried to teleport the entire team off the plane at once. More people than he'd ever moved simultaneously. The strain nearly broke him, but he got them all to a nearby building and collapsed the second they landed. The jet went down with Angel still on board. Psylocke jumped clear just in time. Inside the pyramid, En-Sabah-Nur came back to himself. Still in the same body, the transfer incomplete. He had been that close. He teleported out, furious, and started calling out for Charles through the open connection between them. He knew Charles could hear him. He wasn't finished. That's when Peter hit him, over and over at supersonic speed before En-Sabah-Nur could even process what was happening. But En-Sabah-Nur adapted. He trapped Peter's foot in the ground, then snapped his leg. Peter was down. Raven had run out of ways to get through to Eric. She made a different call, shifted into Psylocke's form, and got close enough to En-Sabah-Nur to make her move. En-Sabah-Nur ordered who he thought was Psylocke to finish Peter. She turned on him instead. His healing took care of it almost instantly, and he grabbed her by the throat, calling her feeble, telling Charles to come and save her. Charles heard it, and he used that open connection to push back into En-Sabah-Nur's mind directly. The moment Charles entered, En-Sabah-Nur released Raven. His focus pulled inward, the two of them now locked in a battle inside his own consciousness. But En-Sabah-Nur was ancient and powerful, even in his own mind, and he started gaining the upper hand. From the outside, he used that same connection to locate exactly where Charles was hiding, and began pulling the building apart around him, tearing it down piece by piece to get to him. Charles was about to be exposed. That's when Magneto stepped in. He had seen enough. He turned on En-Sabah-Nur. He sent everything at him. Metal pulled from the ruins of Cairo, debris, structural beams, anything his power could reach. En-Sabah-Nur stood in the middle of it behind a force field that stopped everything cold. Scott fired his beams, deflected. Hank came at him directly and got thrown back. One by one, En-Sabah-Nur neutralized everything they had, because he had lived through thousands of years of battle and had the power of every mutant he had ever absorbed running through him. Then Charles reached out to Jean. He told her to let go. Stop holding back. Let it all out. Jean had spent years being afraid of what lived inside her. The power that was too big, too raw, too dangerous. Charles told her it wasn't too much. He told her now. Jean stepped out into the open. Outside, she hit En-Sabah-Nur with everything she had, telekinetically tearing at him, pushing past his force field. At the same time, she pushed into the mind battle alongside Charles. En-Sabah-Nur was being overwhelmed on both fronts simultaneously for the first time. What came out of Jean Grey in that moment had no name yet. A force that went far beyond telepathy or telekinesis, something consuming and absolute. The force field came down first. Then the armor, pulled apart piece by piece, leaving En-Sabah-Nur exposed for the first time. Magneto didn't hesitate. He drove metal straight through him, pinning him in place. En-Sabah-Nur tried to escape, tried to teleport away. Storm sent lightning into the portal before it could open. He was trapped. And Jean kept going until there was nothing left of him. En-Sabah-Nur, the first mutant, the being who had survived the fall of civilizations and thousands of years buried under stone, was gone. The world he had started pulling apart slowly went still.
In 1994, on the streets of Hell's Kitchen, New York, a young boy named Matt Murdock saw an elderly man about to be struck by a truck. Without thinking, Matt rushed forward and pushed him out of the way. The truck swerved, but its cargo of unmarked chemical barrels spilled across the street, and the toxic substance splashed directly into Matt's eyes. Slowly, over the hours that followed, the light faded from his world. But what those chemicals took from Matt, they replaced with something else. His remaining senses sharpened past anything human. His hearing could pick up a heartbeat across a room. His touch could read ink from a printed page. His sense of balance and space became so precise he could move through a fight like he was seeing it. He didn't understand the gift yet. It would be years before he did. But the blind boy from Hell's Kitchen would grow into something the criminals of New York would learn to fear. That same year, in the middle of the American heartland, another kind of darkness was unfolding. A family lived in a quiet Ohio suburb. A father named Alexei, a mother named Melina, and their two young daughters, Natasha and Yelena. Yelena chasing fireflies in the backyard at dusk. Natasha riding her bike down the street. American Pie playing on the radio. 3 years of American life. Picture perfect. None of it was real. They were deep-cover Soviet operatives planted by the Red Room. A secret Russian program built on a simple and terrifying idea. A woman could walk into places a man never could. She could slip past guards, sit across from powerful men, and finish a mission before anyone ever realized she was the threat. The Red Room took young girls from their families, stripped them of their names and identities, and reshaped them into living weapons. Elite assassins who could become anyone, infiltrate anywhere, and disappear without a trace. They called them Black Widows. And the Ohio mission had been theirs: infiltrate a nearby Hydra research facility and steal their work on mind control, the same science that built the Winter Soldier. In 1995, the mission ended. Their cover blew. The four of them fled under heavy fire in a small plane, young Natasha at the controls after her mother was shot, tearing out of American airspace. They landed in Cuba, where a man named Dreykov was waiting, the head of the Red Room. The data was his, and now the girls would go back where they belonged. Natasha was 11. She had already spent years in the Red Room before Ohio, and she knew what was waiting. The training, the conditioning, the way they broke you down until nothing soft remained. Her 6-year-old sister didn't know any of it. Yelena still believed the family had been real. They were both sent back. For years they would be trained to fight, to kill, to feel nothing. The family that had never been real was gone, and what remained were 2 girls learning to become Black Widows. It would be 21 years before they found each other again, and by the time they did, one of them would be fighting on the other side of the world, standing shoulder to shoulder with Earth's greatest heroes. Far from Earth, a different story was playing out. 6 years had passed since the Kree pulled Carol Danvers out of the wreckage of Mar-Vell's engine and remade her as one of their own. They called her Vers now, a warrior of the Empire and a member of Star Force, the Kree's elite unit. Everything she had been before, Earth, her name, the people who had loved her, was gone. As far as she knew, she had always been Kree. In 1995, on a border planet called Torfa, everything she thought she knew began to unravel. Torfa was a hiding place for the last of the Skrulls, refugees led by a general named Talos. Years ago, Talos had trusted Mar-Vell with everything: his people, his wife, his daughter, all handed over for safekeeping when she promised to find a way to get them out of Kree reach. So when Mar-Vell went silent, they all went silent with her. Talos had spent years searching for any trace of them. Every trail went cold, until a Kree operative was sent to investigate the Skrull presence on Torfa, and Talos got to him first. The Skrulls had technology the Kree never expected them to have, a memory probe that could reach inside a mind and pull out what was buried. Talos used it and set a trap. When Star Force came to rescue their agent, they walked into it. And out of every Star Force member who could have gotten caught, powers of the scriptwriter folks, Vers was the one who did. Strapped into the same machine, her memories began leaking out in front of Talos, and what he saw stopped him. Mar-Vell, alive, a test flight, a crash, a planet no one would think to search, small and overlooked on every map he had ever seen. Mar-Vell had been hiding there the whole time, and this Kree warrior in his machine had been there with her. Talos set course for Earth. Before he could pull more from her, Vers broke free, fought her way through the ship, and escaped in a pod that tore through the atmosphere and crashed through the roof of a Blockbuster Video in Los Angeles. She didn't know where she was, but something about this place felt strangely familiar. On Earth, 2 young S.H.I.E.L.D. agents found her, Nick Fury and Phil Coulson. With their help, she pieced the rest of her life back together. Talos found her too, and together they tracked down his family on Mar-Vell's orbital lab. Years of searching ended in a single moment. And when Carol finally stood face to face again with the man who had taken her life from her, she let go of the conditioning that had chained her power. What came out of her was beyond anything in this galaxy. She tore through a Kree fleet that came to silence her, burned ships across the atmosphere like falling stars, and sent the survivors home with a message. She left Earth that year to take the fight back to the Kree homeworld.
to free her fellow captives from the supreme intelligence that had controlled them for centuries, the same way it had controlled her. Before she left, she gave Fury a pager. If the world ever faced something humanity couldn't handle, he could use it to call her back. A promise and a last resort. Fury walked away from all of it changed. He also walked away with one less eye, thanks to a cat named Goose who turned out not to be a cat at all. What stayed with him was bigger than any of it. He had seen what one person with real power could do, and he began to wonder what the world might look like if he could find more of them, bring them together, and get them ready for whatever came next. He started putting something together. Just an idea at first, rough, unnamed. He would come to call it the Avengers Initiative. In the 2 years that followed, Fury and Talos worked out a quiet arrangement between them. The Skrulls would stay on Earth and serve as Fury's invisible eyes and ears, and in return, Fury and Carol would one day find them a home of their own. Both sides signed on in good faith. Whether that promise would actually be kept is a story for another time.
Far away in the mountains of China, the sacred village of Ta Lo had spent thousands of years guarding the Dark Gate, hidden from the outside world. For those who don't remember, we talked about Ta Lo all the way back in episode 1, so go check that one out if you need a refresher. In 1996, the village caught the attention of Shu Wenwu. He had run out of kingdoms to take, so he had moved on to chasing legends. Ta Lo was one of them. When he reached its gate, a guardian named Ying Li was waiting for him. She fought him to a standstill, and then, somehow, she loved him. For the first time in 1,000 years, Wenwu set the rings down. He stayed with Ying Li, and they had 2 children together, a daughter named Xialing and a son named Shang-Chi, who would one day stand against his own father. Whether the warlord could really walk away from the life he had built was a question waiting for its answer. That same year, in 1996, a 9-year-old boy named Mark Spector lost his younger brother in an accident. His mother blamed him for it, and day after day she punished him for surviving. The weight of it was more than a child's mind could carry, and somewhere inside him, a door opened. A new person stepped through. His name was Stephen Grant, quiet and gentle, and he took the pain Mark couldn't. For the rest of his life, Mark would be more than one person, and one day, the world would come to know all of them. That same year, somewhere over the Himalayas, a private plane fell out of the sky. On board was a wealthy American businessman named Wendell Rand, who ran one of the largest corporations in New York. He was on a trip to Asia with his wife Heather and their 10-year-old son, Danny. Only one of them walked away from the crash. Danny was found in the snow by monks from Kunlun, the same hidden city we covered back in episode 1. They took him in, raised him, and over the next 15 years, they would train him for the rite that every generation of Kunlun produced, the trial of Shao Lao the Undying. The next Iron Fist had just survived a plane crash. He didn't know it yet. In 1998, Nick Fury fell in love with one of his own assets. Her name was Vara, a Skrull who had stayed behind on Earth as part of Talos' network and worked closely with Fury for years. The relationship was real on both sides. They would eventually marry, and the world would never know. It's time to step into a new reality. On Earth 26,320, vampires were real, and they had been quietly building their power for centuries. The man hunting them was Eric Brooks, better known as Blade. His mother had been bitten by a vampire while she was pregnant with him, and the bite passed something on. Blade had been born somewhere between the two worlds, fully human in the things that hurt vampires, with all the vampire strength and speed on top of it. They called him the Daywalker. In 1998, Blade closed in on Deacon Frost, a powerful vampire who had been trying to summon La Magra, an ancient blood god whose return would have ended humanity. Blade stopped him before the ritual could finish. He also found out that night that Frost was the one who had bitten his mother all those years ago. The vampire he had spent his life hunting had been the reason he existed in the first place. Back on Earth 616 in 1999, the country of Sokovia had been torn apart by war for years, and on one quiet evening, it came for the Maximoff family. A shell tore through their apartment building. Their parents didn't survive. Young Wanda and Pietro, somehow still alive, found themselves trapped under the rubble with a Stark Industries missile sitting a few feet away, the Stark logo stamped on its side, unexploded. For 2 days, they waited. Every shift of the debris, every tick from the warhead could have been the last thing they ever heard. The missile never went off, but something else took root in that rubble instead. A hatred for the name on the side of that shell. and a sister who would carry that hatred with her for years to come. Out in deep space in the year 2000, a different kind of horror was doing its work. His name was Thanos, and he came from a planet called Titan that had once been thriving. Titan had outgrown its resources, and its people had ignored Thanos when he warned them what was coming. He proposed a brutal solution: take out half the population at random and let the other half live. The Titans called him a madman and refused. Then their world died exactly the way he said it would. Titan became a graveyard, and Thanos walked away from it carrying one belief he would never let go of. The universe was running out of room, and someone had to make the cut. So he went planet to planet doing it himself. By 2000, he was already deep into his work. On a small world called Zen-Huberi, his army rounded up the population and split them in half. And as they did, Thanos noticed a small girl who fought back harder than anyone twice her size. He pulled her aside while his soldiers ended her parents and the rest of her people. He took her with him when he left. He named her Gamora, and he raised her to be the deadliest woman in the galaxy. That same year, a family was driving home from a trip when an argument between two siblings distracted the father just long enough. The car hit the truck in front of it. A 14-year-old girl named Jessica Jones was the only one who walked out of the wreckage alive. She thought she was. She woke up in a hospital weeks later, told that her parents and her brother were gone, and was taken in by a kind family who promised to raise her as their own. What no one told her was that during her coma, a private medical company called IGH had quietly experimented on her. When she woke up, she was stronger than any 14-year-old should ever be. And somewhere out of sight, her mother was waking up too. In 2002, back on Earth 26,320, a new kind of creature started showing up across Europe. They were called Reapers. They were faster, stronger, and hungrier than vampires. And unlike vampires, they fed on humans and vampires alike. To everyone outside the inner circle, it looked like a mutation, a natural strain of the vampire virus that had spiraled out of control. The Reapers spread fast, and the vampire elders, looking at extinction for the first time in their lives, came to the one man who could actually stop them: Blade. The one leading them was Eli Damaskinos, an ancient pure-blood vampire who had been alive for thousands of years and looked every day of it. He offered Blade the Blood Pack, a unit of vampire warriors who had originally been trained to take him down, and asked him to fight alongside them. He took the deal. Together, they hunted the Reapers through the sewers of Prague. Somewhere in those tunnels, his own team turned on him. The Blood Pack had been waiting for this moment. They overpowered him, captured him, and brought him back to Damaskinos' compound, exactly where Damaskinos had wanted him from the start. That's where the truth came out. The Reapers weren't a mutation. They had been engineered, and the story Damaskinos had spun about hunting them had been a setup. What he actually wanted was Blade's blood. Damaskinos had been trying to engineer a new kind of vampire, one immune to sunlight, silver, and garlic, a bloodline that wouldn't have to hide anymore. He had even tested the work on his own son, a man named Nomak, and the experiment had turned the boy into the very first Reaper. The process wasn't working on its own, but Blade was already the thing Damaskinos was trying to build, and with enough of his blood, the rest would fall into place. In the chaos that followed, Nomak finally got his hands on his father, and Damaskinos paid for what he had done. But Nomak wasn't done. He wanted every drop of his father's bloodline gone, and that meant his sister too. Her name was Nyssa, the one member of the Blood Pack who had ever treated Blade with any decency. So when Nomak came for her, Blade ran him through with his own sword. The bloodline that was supposed to change the world ended that night on the floor of Damaskinos' compound. That same year, in another reality entirely, a different kind of hero was about to be born. On Earth 96,283, a high school student in Queens, New York named Peter Parker went on a school field trip to Oscorp, one of the largest biotech companies in the city, run by a brilliant scientist named Norman Osborn. Peter was the school paper's photographer, so he was busy taking pictures when a genetically modified spider landed on his hand and bit him. By the next morning, his body had changed. He could see clearer than he ever had before. He could lift things he shouldn't have been able to lift. He could stick to walls. At first, Peter used what was happening to him for himself. He needed money, so he found a way to make some. But that was before his Uncle Ben was taken from him by a robber Peter could have stopped earlier and didn't. And it was in that moment that the words his uncle had said to him only hours before became the famous line the world would remember forever. With great power comes great responsibility. So he put a mask on and started swinging through New York. The press would give him a name soon enough. Spider-Man. His first real fight came from a place closer to home than he expected. Peter's best friend, Harry Osborn, was Norman's son, and Norman had been working on an experimental serum designed to give people superhuman strength. With his funding about to get pulled, Norman tested it on himself to prove it worked. It half worked. The strength came, but it took his mind with it. By the time he was on his feet again, there were two men inside him. The press named the second one the same way they had named Spider-Man. They called him the Green Goblin. The Goblin didn't like heroes. He thought the world ran better when men like him were the ones at the top, and Spider-Man was a problem he intended to solve. So he made it his mission to take him out. The two went at it from the Queensboro Bridge to an abandoned building on Roosevelt Island, and in the end, the Goblin's own arrogance got him. He came at Peter with his glider one last time. Peter dodged. The glider didn't. Norman was gone. Before Norman went, he asked Peter for one last thing. Don't tell Harry. Peter, still in shock from finding out who the Goblin really was, agreed. He carried Norman's body back to the Osborn penthouse to give him a proper return home. That's where Harry walked in. He saw Spider-Man standing over his father's body, and from that moment on, there was only one story he could tell himself. At the funeral a few days later, Harry made a vow. He would find a way to make Spider-Man pay for what he'd done. Across the multiverse, on Earth 701306, another blind boy from Hell's Kitchen had grown up. Only this one had been doing it years before the one we covered on Earth 616 was even born. His childhood story almost rhymes with the one we already met. Same neighborhood, same kind of chemicals, same loss of sight. Same boxer father taken out by mobsters when he was still a kid, the same reason he eventually picked up a mask. By 2003, this Matt Murdock was a defense attorney by day and a masked vigilante by night. They called him Daredevil. That same year, he met a woman named Elektra Natchios, the daughter of a wealthy businessman, and for a few brief moments, something between them started to bloom, until her father made the wrong call. Nicholas Natchios had been business partners with the local crime boss, the Kingpin, for years. Now he was trying to walk away. But nobody walks away from a man like the Kingpin and lives to talk about it. So the Kingpin sent a hitman named Bullseye to take care of him. Daredevil tried to stop it and lost. Elektra was there when it happened, and from her angle, only one story made sense. She came after Daredevil for revenge, blaming him for what happened to her father, before realizing Bullseye was the one she actually wanted. She went after him herself and didn't make it back. By the time Daredevil arrived, the woman he had been falling for was gone. Now it was personal. He hunted Bullseye down to a church, and during the fight, Bullseye gave up the Kingpin's real name, Wilson Fisk, the same Fisk whose men had taken out Jack Murdock all those years ago. The man Matt had spent his whole life hunting had been right in front of him the entire time. Daredevil ended Bullseye's career with a fall from a church window. Then he came for Fisk, beat him to within an inch of his life, and chose to spare him in the end. Sometime later, Matt was back on the rooftop where he and Elektra had first kissed. He found a pendant lying there with her name engraved on it in Braille. Elektra was alive, and somewhere out there, she was already finding her way back to a different kind of life. 2 years later, Elektra would get her own story. After what happened in the church, she had been brought back by a blind martial arts master named Stick, the last keeper of an ancient discipline called Kimagure. Stick's order, the Chaste, had been at war with the Hand for centuries. He took her in, taught her the art, and tried to give her a second chance. But Elektra had been carrying something since she was a little girl. Her mother had been taken right in front of her, and the face of the man who did it had haunted her dreams ever since. The rage that came with that memory was something even Stick couldn't pull out of her, and eventually, he sent her away. Elektra spent the years that followed as a contract operative, taking high-paying jobs from anonymous clients. Then one of those clients gave her a job with strange conditions. She was supposed to spend a few days on an island before being told who the targets were. During those few days, she got to know a man named Mark Miller and his 13-year-old daughter, Abby. Then the names came down. Mark and Abby were the targets. Elektra refused the job and walked away. But somewhere on the road back, something stopped her. For the first time in her adult life, Elektra felt something she hadn't been able to feel since she was a little girl. She turned around and went back. By the time she got there, the Hand was already coming. They had come for Abby. The girl turned out to be what they called the Treasure, a once-in-a-generation prodigy whose powers would tip the long war one way or the other. The Hand sent its best after them, including Karigi, the son of the Hand's master.
When Elektra finally stood face to face with him, she realized something else. Kurigi was the same man who had taken her mother all those years ago. The horned demon from her nightmares had a name. Elektra protected the girl. She took on Kurigi, took on the Hand's deadliest weapons, and when the dust settled, the truth about the contract finally came out. The anonymous client who had sent her after Mark and Abby in the first place had been Stick. The same master who had thrown her out for being too consumed by rage had set the whole thing up as a test, to see if she had finally learned compassion. By the end, Abby was safe, the Hand had been pushed back, and Elektra walked away from the contract life for good. That's the last we'll see of Earth 701306. We're not going back. 2 years later, in 2004, back on Earth 96,283, Peter Parker was struggling. The double life had ground him down. He was failing his classes, behind on rent, losing the girl he loved, and his powers were starting to flicker out on him. While Peter was falling apart, a brilliant scientist named Dr. Otto Octavius was running an experiment that was supposed to change the world. A fusion reactor that would give the planet limitless energy. To control it, he had attached himself to a set of artificial intelligence-driven mechanical arms. The experiment failed. The arms fused permanently to his spine. The AI took over what was left of his mind, and Otto came back changed, obsessed with finishing the experiment that had ruined him, no matter the cost. He came to the conclusion that he needed a bigger reactor this time, big enough to actually hold the reaction. So he started funding it the only way he had left, by robbing banks. The press, doing what the press always did in this city, gave him a name, Dr. Octopus. But the reactor needed one specific element to run, tritium, and there was only one place to get it, Oscorp, which was now run by Harry Osborn, who had been waiting years for someone to bring him Spider-Man's head on a plate. Harry agreed to hand over the tritium on one condition. Octavius had to deliver Peter, alive or otherwise. And Octavius did. That's when Harry finally found out the face behind the mask belonged to his best friend. He couldn't go through with it, and there was no time anyway. Otto still had Mary Jane, and the only person who could go get her back was Spider-Man. Harry let Peter go. The reactor Octavius built with the tritium was big enough to take Manhattan with it. Peter caught up to him before it could. He managed to reach the man still buried somewhere inside Dr. Octopus. Otto chose his own end, taking his reactor down with him. Peter walked away from the fight as something close to whole. Mary Jane had seen his face by then, so she knew everything. As for Harry, the discovery had already broken something inside him. He had let Spider-Man go. But that didn't mean he was done with him. The Goblin's son was about to become a problem of his own. Back on Earth 26,320, the vampires Blade had spent his life hunting were tired of being hunted. The FBI had been on Blade's trail for a while too, convinced he was a vigilante taking down innocent people based on conspiracy theories about vampires. So the vampires gave them what they needed. They used a human, dressed up to look like one of their own, and made sure Blade took him out with witnesses and cameras rolling. The footage went straight to the authorities. Just like that, the world's most wanted vampire hunter became the world's most wanted man. The FBI picked him up, and for the first time, Blade was off the board. He didn't stay there for long. A team of underground vampire fighters called the Night Stalkers, led by a sharpshooter named Abigail Whistler and a quick-witted operator named Hannibal King, broke him out and brought him in on what the vampires had really been planning. They had gone all the way back to the beginning of their species and woken up the first one of them, Drake. Or, as the human world had come to call him over the centuries, Dracula. The vampires wanted his ancient blood. Drake was the only one of them who could walk in sunlight, and they were going to use his bloodline to remake the entire vampire race in his image. A world of daywalkers, where humans had nowhere left to hide. What the vampires didn't know was that the Night Stalkers had been quietly working on something of their own. The Night Stalkers were a new generation of hunters, and from where they stood, Blade's one-man crusade with a sword and a few silver rounds was already outdated. The future of this war was going to be fought with science. They had a blind scientist on the team named Summerfield, and Summerfield had been developing a bioweapon called Daystar, a virus engineered to wipe out vampires at the genetic level. The compound itself was ready, but to actually wipe out the entire species, the virus needed to be activated by the blood of the original vampire himself. Drake's blood. Drake came to them while Blade and Abigail were out. He tore through the Night Stalker's hideout, took out most of the team, including Summerfield herself, and walked off with Hannibal King and Summerfield's young daughter Zoe as hostages. By the time Blade and Abigail got back, the place was a graveyard. But Summerfield had left them something. A video recording, made before the attack, just in case. In it, she confirmed what they already knew. The virus was there, but it needed Drake's blood to reach its full effect. She also gave them one last warning. There was a chance the virus might take Blade with them. Blade and Abigail had no choice now. They had to come for Drake, both to get their people back and to put the virus inside the one vampire it was designed for. They hit Drake's base hard. Abigail put an arrow into him carrying the virus, and as Drake's blood activated it, the entire bloodline crumbled into dust around them. The first vampire fell, and so did everyone who had inherited his blood.
In 2005, on a brand new reality, Earth 121698, the Fantastic Four we already met on Earth 828 came together a different way. Reed Richards had a theory that a passing cosmic cloud could rewrite human DNA. To study it up close, he needed something he didn't have: money, and a space station built to take that kind of impact. So he turned to an old college friend who had both. Victor Von Doom, billionaire, owner of an orbital research station rigged with shields designed for exactly this kind of cosmic event. Victor agreed to bankroll it. Reed brought his oldest friend, Ben Grimm, and his ex-girlfriend Sue Storm, who had since become Victor's right hand at the company. Sue's younger brother Johnny came along too. The five of them went up and started the mission. That's when the catastrophe hit. Reed had miscalculated the cloud's path. It arrived hours ahead of schedule. The shields didn't have time to come up, and every person on that station got caught right in the middle of it, Victor included. They made it back to Earth alive and convinced they had walked away from it. Then they were placed in quarantine for observation, and that's when the powers started showing up. Reed's body wouldn't stay the shape it was supposed to be. Sue could disappear. Johnny could burn. But Ben got the worst hand of all. The radiation had turned him into living rock that he couldn't change back from. He slipped out of the facility to find his fiancée Debbie, the woman he was supposed to spend his life with. She took one look at him and ran. Ben ended up alone on the Brooklyn Bridge. That's where the rest of them found him. A scene unfolded on that bridge that morning, and by the time it was over, all four of them had been seen by the public using what they had become to save people. The press gave them the name that would stick: the Fantastic Four. Victor came back changed too, but for him, it wasn't just powers. The radiation had begun turning his body into living metal, and his mind right along with it. His company had been days away from going public when the accident happened. The disaster sent the stock into freefall. His board pushed him out, and just like that, everything he had built was gone. He blamed Reed for all of it. While the four of them got the headlines and the fame, Victor watched it all from the wreckage of his old life and got worse with every passing day. Reed had brought the team back to his old place, the Baxter Building, to figure out what they had become. He made Ben a promise the day they got back. He would find a way to fix him. Reed got to work on it, but he also got back close to Sue, the woman he should never have let walk away in the first place. And somewhere in the middle of finding his way back to her, the cure stopped getting his full attention. Ben watched the man who had promised to give him his old life back start building a new one of his own, and the resentment started to grow. That's when Doom moved. He had been waiting for a way in, and Ben was it. He fed Ben lies, twisted Reed's silence into betrayal, and turned the strongest member of the team against the man who needed him most. By the time Ben realized he had been played, Doom was already on top of Reed. Ben came back for his team. The four of them fought Doom together, beat him, froze him in place, and shipped him back to his home country of Latveria.
2 years later, in 2007, this same Earth got its second crisis. A figure on a silver surfboard came riding down through the atmosphere, leaving holes in the ground wherever he passed. Johnny was the first one to lay eyes on him, and after the encounter, he gave him a name that stuck: the Silver Surfer. On this Earth, the Silver Surfer was a man instead of a woman. His name was Norrin Radd. He was the herald of Galactus, the cosmic being who would arrive next, ready to consume the planet whole.
You know the drill by now. Galactus showed up as a massive cloud of cosmic energy hanging in the sky over Earth, and the Fantastic Four had no idea how to stop something that big. But Norrin Radd had spent centuries leading worlds to their end for his master, and somewhere in him, a line had been crossed for the last time. He turned on Galactus, and he gave his life sending the cloud away from Earth. The planet survived, the Fantastic Four went home, and we leave Earth 121698 behind. It's finally time for a stop back home in our good old Earth 616, the mid-2000s. The United States military still hasn't given up on a dream it's chased since the Second World War, the dream of recreating the Super-Soldier, of building another man like the one the world lost decades ago. Leading that effort is General Thaddeus Ross, a hard, ambitious career officer who has spent his life in uniform and believes the next great weapon is worth almost any cost. To get there, he turns to the science of gamma radiation, and he hands the work to a brilliant young researcher named Bruce Banner, who is working side by side with Ross's daughter, Betty. But Ross doesn't tell Banner the whole truth. Bruce believes he's working on something protective, a way to make the human body immune to gamma radiation. He doesn't know the General's real goal is a weapon, and that gap between what Banner thinks he's building and what he's actually building is where everything breaks. The experiment goes wrong, and it goes wrong on Bruce himself. He takes the full force of a gamma radiation accident, and it doesn't destroy him, it changes him. From that day on, when his heart races, when anger takes him, his body becomes something else, something enormous, something he cannot control. The Hulk. Bruce Banner is not a man who wanted power. He's a man horrified by what's now living inside him, by what it could do to anyone who gets close. And the accident has already proven that fear right. Betty was caught in the blast, hurt badly enough to be rushed to a hospital. But while she lies there unconscious, something else happens that hardens Bruce's decision. Ross comes to him. And Ross doesn't talk about the daughter he just nearly lost, or the experiment that just ruined Banner's life. He talks about the asset. He tells Bruce that what's inside him now is a weapon, and that the weapon that Bruce himself belongs to the United States Army. The man who built this disaster is already trying to take ownership of it, so Bruce makes his choice. He doesn't wait for Betty to wake up. He simply disappears, walking away from the work, the life, and the woman he loves. Because being near them now puts them in danger from two different things: the monster inside him and the man who wants to put that monster on a leash. But disappearing doesn't make him free. Ross turns the full weight of the United States military toward finding one man. He brands Banner a fugitive, a thief of government secrets. And what begins as a search becomes an international manhunt that stretches on for 5 long years. Some debts are not paid in coin. By 2006, one of them comes due in a hotel room in Budapest, and the woman it is owed to has spent her whole life trying to outrun it. You remember her from episode 7. One of the 2 little girls the Red Room took back, the one we promised would one day stand at the side of Earth's greatest heroes. This is where that promise starts to keep itself. Her name is Natasha Romanoff, the Black Widow, and by now she has become so dangerous, so good at the only thing she was ever taught to do, that even the world's most secretive intelligence agency, the S.H.I.E.L.D., decides she cannot be left walking. Their director, Nick Fury, the same man we watched begin building something bigger back in episode 7, gives the order. And he sends the one agent in the world he trusts to carry it out. A man called Hawkeye, Clint Barton. A marksman so precise he is said never to miss. And the rare kind of soldier who, somewhere behind the bow, has never quite stopped seeing the person on the other end of the shot. But when Barton finds her in Budapest, he sees something he wasn't briefed on. He sees a woman who wants out. So Barton makes what Natasha would later call, simply, a different call. He doesn't carry the order out. He offers her something instead. A door no one in her life had ever held open for her. Out of the dark, into something else. Natasha walks through it. A door like that has a price. To prove she has truly turned, the S.H.I.E.L.D. sends her back into the dark one more time, partnered with Barton, and the target could not be more personal. Dreykov, the man who took her childhood. For Natasha, this is not an assignment. It is the end of the thing that made her. But Dreykov has lived his whole life as a ghost. The only thing in the world that can lead her to him is the one person in it he loves, his young daughter. So Natasha makes the coldest choice of her career. She uses the girl. And when the building comes down on Dreykov, it comes down on his daughter too. The woman who walks out of that rubble is not the woman who walked in. What followed became one of the last true legends inside the Shield. 10 days in a city that wanted them both gone. 2 operatives hunted across a foreign capital with no one in the world to trust but each other. By the time Budapest spit them back out, Natasha and Clint were the kind of partners only forged in places like that, the kind that last a lifetime. And Natasha walks away believing the job is done, believing Dreykov is gone and the Red Room with him, believing she is, at long last, free. That belief is the only thing that lets her sleep at night for the next 15 years. And it is a lie. Every soul has a price, and there has always been someone keeping count. He has worn 1,000 names across 1,000 years. The one that lasted is Mephisto. When a desperate man signs away the only thing he truly owns, Mephisto does not simply collect it, he forges it. He takes that soul and burns it down into a thing of hellfire and judgment, a spirit of vengeance, and sends it back out to drag in the next name on the list. The world has a word for what he makes, a Ghost Rider. And on a world that sits just beside our own, Earth 121347, that list has been open for a very long time. Roughly a century and a half ago, on the American frontier, the next name on it belonged to a Texas Ranger called Carter Slade. He had been a good man once, before greed hollowed him out, and greed is what put the rope around his neck. So when the stranger appeared with the old offer, a life for a soul, Slade did what desperate men have always done. He signed. And Mephisto sent him to the town of San Venganza to collect a prize unlike any the list had ever held. 1,000 souls bound together in a single contract. So much evil gathered in one place that it could tear a hole between hell and the living world. Slade rode in and took it. And then, holding in his hands the one thing his master wanted most, Carter Slade did something no rider had ever dared. He said no. He turned on the devil who made him, ran with the contract into the dark, and hid it so deep that even hell lost the trail. And here you might be wondering the obvious thing. If Mephisto owned his soul, why couldn't he simply reach out and drag him back? Because that is not how the bargain works. The devil can give the curse of the rider, but he cannot take it back. Not without the cursed man's own consent. Slade understood that. So he did the one thing the devil never expected from him. He stopped. He never called on the fire again. He let the power go quiet inside him until the trail of hellfire that should have led Mephisto straight to him simply went cold. He dug himself a grave with his own name on it, let the world believe the rider was long dead, and became nobody at all, an old man tending a cemetery, hiding in plain sight among ordinary people for 150 years. He passed out of history and into legend, and legends, when the time comes, have a way of being needed again. 150 years later, in 2007, the next name came up, Johnny Blaze. 17 years old, a boy who lived his whole life inside a traveling carnival, learning to ride a motorcycle the same way other kids learn to walk. His father was the headline act. Johnny was the kid in his shadow, in love with a girl named Roxanne, with a plan to take her and run, out of the carnival, into a life he had built up in his head the very next morning. That same night, he learned his father was dying, and Johnny was the kind of boy who would do anything to stop it, even something he could never take back. So the stranger came to him with the same offer he had once made Slade, a life for a soul. By morning, his father was healed, and his father, waking up to find the sickness gone, believed for one beautiful morning that he had cheated life itself. That belief is what put him on the bike that day. He climbed onto it certain that a man who had just survived the impossible could survive anything, and rode straight into a stunt no man could have survived. Johnny had saved him from the sickness and lost him to despair, the way only the devil could make those two things mean the same thing. The soul he had traded still belonged to Mephisto, so Johnny did the only thing he could think to do. He left Roxanne without a word. He left the carnival. He left the boy he used to be, and he disappeared into the road. And then, for years, nothing happened. The devil who had taken his soul went silent on him. No visit, no sign, no collection day. Just a long stretch of empty highway where his damnation was supposed to be. Johnny could not live with that silence, so he started doing the only thing he knew how to do: louder. He climbed onto a bike and threw himself across longer jumps, higher jumps, jumps no man should have been able to walk away from, daring the universe to send him an answer, a sign. Anything that told him the deal could still be broken. Each time he survived, his crew swore he must have an angel watching over him. Johnny knew better. He understood, somewhere deep, that the only thing keeping him alive through all of it was the devil keeping him alive on purpose, saving him for the day the bargain finally came due. What Johnny did not know was that, far older than him, the devil's own house was beginning to crack. Mephisto had a son. His name was Blackheart, and he wanted his father's throne. There was something on Earth that could give it to him. The same contract of 1,000 souls Carter Slade had buried a century and a half before. Find that contract, and even the devil himself could be overthrown. So Blackheart came to Earth to find it. And in 2007, that was the moment Mephisto remembered the boy from the carnival. Johnny Blaze became the next Ghost Rider, bound to serve the same master Slade once turned on. But before the curse came for him, the past did. Roxanne walked back into Johnny's life as a reporter, sent to cover the most famous stunt rider in the country. Sent, in other words, to interview the boy she had spent half her life trying to forget. For one impossible afternoon, Johnny was given the thing every man like him spends his life dreaming about: a second chance. A chance to undo the worst thing he had ever done. They made a plan to see each other that night, and it was that night, of all the nights in his life, that the devil chose to call him in. Johnny changed for the first time. The man he had been disappeared into a thing of bone and hellfire, and the rider went out into the city to hunt the wicked, the way every Ghost Rider before him had. And that very same night, he came face to face for the first time with the very thing Mephisto had sent him to stop: Blackheart, the devil's own son, in the flesh, hunting for the contract. They tore at each other through the streets of the city, and by morning, neither one had finished the other. When the sun came up and Johnny was Johnny again, he found himself somewhere he had not chosen: a quiet cemetery on the edge of town, lying in the grass at the foot of an old chapel. The rider had brought him there. The spirit, it turned out, knew where it belonged. What it had brought him to was an old man tending the graves. The man knew Johnny's name before Johnny ever gave it. He knew what Johnny was and what he was about to become. He called himself the Caretaker, and he had been waiting for this rider for a very long time. Johnny did not really hear him. He had too much on his mind, and the biggest part of it was the woman whose night he had just ruined. He went to her to apologize, and Roxanne shut the door on him. She had spent the better part of her adult life learning not to care about Johnny Blaze, and she was not going to let him walk back through that door so easily. But love is a stubborn thing. By nightfall, she came back to him on her own, not to forgive him, but to ask the one question she had carried for years. Why did you leave? So he told her. The deal, the devil, the rider, the whole impossible truth of his life. And of course, she did not believe him. The man she had once loved had turned into someone who told fairy tales to dodge a real conversation. She walked out a second time, and this time it really did feel final. Meanwhile, the things the rider had done the night before could not stay buried for long. A road on fire, wreckage no human could have caused, witnesses. The police pieced enough of it together to put Johnny's name on a list, and they brought him in for answers. It was the worst thing they could have done to him. A holding cell is not a holding cell to a Ghost Rider. It is a room full of the kind of men the rider was built to punish. Night fell. The curse rose. And what happened in that cell was the devil's mercy turning a cage into a hunting ground. By morning, Johnny was free again, on Blackheart's trail again, and waking up again in the same cemetery where the spirit had taken him before. Only this time, the old man tending the graves had Johnny's full attention. And this time, the old man told him the legend. of a Texas Ranger who had once stood where Johnny was now standing, the first rider to defy the devil and hide the contract from him. He told Johnny everything about that man. He just left out the part where that man was him. And here the legend closes its circle. Blackheart had been one step ahead the whole time. He had already taken something Johnny could not live without, Roxanne, and he offered to trade her for the contract. So Johnny came back to the old man and asked for it anyway, knowing the cost, knowing the risk. And the old man, faced with a rider asking for the one thing he had spent 150 years refusing to give up, finally took the mask off. The caretaker was Carter Slade. He had been Slade the whole time. And Slade, who had once damned himself for greed, saw a man asking for the same impossible thing he had once asked for, but for the exact opposite reason. Johnny wasn't doing it for himself, he was doing it for love. And to a rider who had spent 150 years carrying the weight of his own selfish bargain, that was the one reason worth handing the contract over for. Slade gave him the contract. Then, for the first time since the frontier, he climbed onto his horse and rode one final ride at Johnny's side, out toward the ghost town of San Venganza, where the legend had begun. Johnny won, but winning taught him what Slade already knew, that he was never meant to be free in this, only useful. So he made the same choice the rider before him made. He kept the power instead of handing it back, and he turned the weapon Hell gave him against Hell itself. Years later, we will find Johnny a changed man, living alone, far from everyone, an exile still chained to a curse he has spent his life trying to break. What pulls him back out of the dark is a boy, and a devil who wants that boy's body for himself. But that is a ride for another time. Let's do one last stop on Earth 96283. It is 2007, and for the first time in a long time, Peter Parker is a man at peace with his own life. The city loves him. The press writes him into headlines. Mary Jane is on a Broadway stage, and in his pocket, Peter is carrying a ring he plans to give her any day now. The boy from Queens has finally caught up to his own life, and for a brief stretch of time, he gets to enjoy it. One quiet night, a small meteor falls out of the sky and breaks open near Peter, and out of it crawls a living thing the planet has never seen before. A creature from far past our own solar system, looking for a host strong enough to give it a body. It finds one. It hides itself on Peter's moped and begins to wait. Peter never sees it. While Peter went about his life unaware, an old wound in it was sharpening itself into a blade. Harry Osborn has spent the last year forging himself into a new kind of goblin, in his father's image, and he comes for the boy who was once his closest friend. The two of them fight like brothers turned strangers, until a blow to the head takes the truth straight out of Harry's mind. When he wakes in a hospital bed, the memory of what Peter is has fallen out of him, and the friend he used to be has come back in its place. For a moment, Peter is given a piece of his old life again. He does not yet understand how cruel a mercy that truly is. Not long after, Spider-Man saves a young woman from a deadly accident in broad daylight, and the city decides he is a hero worth honoring. They throw him a parade. Peter Parker has reached the top of his own life. What Peter does not see, from up where he is the woman who loves him quietly losing her footing on the way down. Mary Jane has been booed off her stage. Her career is slipping out of her hands, and every time she tries to tell Peter, he is too high on the sound of his own name to really listen. Peter is living his best life, completely unaware that the woman beside him is not. And while Peter is at the top of his life, the floor begins to slide out from under it. The job he has been chasing at the newspaper, the steady photographer's spot at the Daily Bugle, is handed to someone else, a young rival named Eddie Brock, who has been hungrier and louder for it. Peter is humiliated. The city he just got the key to has started to forget his name for someone else's, and while he is still nursing that wound, an even bigger one announces itself in broad daylight. A creature made of sand rises up in the middle of the city and tears open an armored car. Desperate for money he is trying to get his hands on for reasons no one will learn until the very end. He outmatches Spider-Man before disappearing into the streets. Peter has no idea who he just fought. Still blind to the woman beside him, Peter decides to do the one thing he has been planning for months, the big move. He takes Mary Jane out, ring in his pocket, ready to give her the night of her life. And the night goes wrong before he can even ask. She is hurting, he is not listening, and what was supposed to be the question of a lifetime never gets out of his mouth. Mary Jane walks out alone. Peter goes home shaken, and the phone rings. It is the police chief. There is something Peter needs to hear, and there is no soft way to say it. The man Peter had spent his life believing took Uncle Ben had been only the accomplice. The man who had truly done it was still walking the earth. His name was Flint Marko, the very same man, made now of sand, that Peter had just fought in the street that afternoon. Something hardens inside Peter that he does not know how to name. The grief he believed he had buried with his uncle is back, and this time it has somewhere to go. He puts the suit on and hunts. He waits long into the night for any sign of Marko. Eventually, exhaustion takes him, and Peter falls asleep in his costume. Here's the thing I have not told you yet. The creature that crawled onto his moped weeks ago did not stay there. It had followed Peter home and lived in the walls of his life ever since, biding its time for a night exactly like this one. While Peter slept, the creature found him at last. By the time he woke, the suit was black, and so was what lived in him. What the creature did to Peter Parker in the weeks that followed was the oldest exchange there is. It gave him strength and speed and a sharpened edge, and in return it asked for small pieces of who he was. He gave them up without knowing. He hunted Marko down and believed he had finally avenged his uncle. He had not. Marko had survived, the way men in this kind of story always do, but that was a truth Peter would not learn until later. What he did with the rest of the creature's gift was uglier still. He destroyed a struggling photographer named Eddie Brock, exposed a lie of his, ended his career on the spot. Not because he had to, but because the thing inside him took pleasure in it. He paraded his classmate Gwen in front of Mary Jane to twist the knife, and when Mary Jane finally raised her voice to him, he raised his hand back. He struck the woman he had been carrying a ring around for. That was the moment Peter Parker saw himself for the first time since the creature had taken him. He looked at his own hand and did not recognize it. He climbed into the dark of an old bell tower that same night, and he tore the thing off of himself the only way it could be torn, through the ringing of the bells, the one sound the creature could not endure. He bled it off his body, piece by piece, until what was left of him collapsed to the floor as a man again. But a thing like that does not die because a man rejects it. It only goes looking for the next one. And it had been listening, all this time, for the angriest and most humiliated heart it could find. It found Eddie Brock, who had come to pray for the end of Peter Parker that very night. The creature took him. The two of them became one. Venom, a Spider-Man wearing all the rage Peter had finally walked away from. Venom went looking for help, and he found it in the only other man in the city who hated Spider-Man enough to listen. Flint Marko, still alive, still grieving a daughter of his own. The two of them took Mary Jane and waited for Peter to come. Peter went, knowing he would be outnumbered, and help arrived from the last place on Earth he would ever have expected it. Harry, his memory returned and the truth about his father finally clear, chose Peter one more time over the grief that had ruled him for years. The fight cost Harry everything, but before he was gone, the friend he had once been was the one beside him. And in the rubble afterward, when Flint Marko was the last enemy left standing, he told Peter the thing he had never been able to tell anyone, that the night Uncle Ben had been taken, he had never meant to do it. It had been an accident, born of a desperate moment in a man's own life. The weight of it had followed him every day since. Peter, standing as himself again in the ruin of everything, gave Marko the one thing Peter had never believed he could give: forgiveness, and he let him go. And so this Peter Parker walks back into the rest of his life lighter and heavier at the same time. A best friend in the ground. A version of himself he never wants to meet again, still living somewhere in the back of his mind. And a woman he almost lost, whom he must now learn how to find his way back to. The boy from Queens has learned the oldest lesson the suit had to teach him, that the worst monsters a man fights are the ones he carries inside.